Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the Undying Fire balance in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 1, A Message. Zuko. Zuko twitched, still pretty much asleep, when something crashed into him. He yelped, eyes snapping open. A shadowy blur greeted his vision. Hands gripped his tunic and then a familiar voice babbled a string of words at him, all at lightning speed. Groaning and conjuring flames for light, which he winced at, Zuko directed a very bleary-eyed glare at the monk now sitting on his lap. "Ain," he said, voice hoarse and his hair sticking up everywhere. "Has anyone ever told you that it's not a good idea to tackle people awake? I could have burned you, idiot." Sorry, but you don't understand. I had to come and tell you now because I think I saw I don't really know if I saw him exactly because." Zuko pinched the bridge of his nose with his free hand. Ain was speaking too fast again. "Ain, slow down. There was lots of mist and stuff, and everything was kind of blurry, and..." "Ain." Zuko gripped his shoulder. "Stop. But. Just stop." Ain did. "Now breathe." Ain did that too. Some of the tension eased from his body and he relaxed more against Zuko. "Okay." Zuko guided his flames to light the candle on the small dresser, then lifted Aang off his lap and plonked him on the bed. "Now tell me what's going on." Slowly. Aang leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. "I think I saw Roku." "You serious?" "Yeah. I was in this misty place, right? And it looked heaps like the spirit world. Like heaps. And Roku, or at least a guy who looked a lot like Roku, was standing there in the mist and he called my name." "Wait, how did you get to the misty place?" "In my dream." Zuko scrunched his nose. "That's it? You dreamed about a person, who may or may not have been Avatar Roku, and he called your name." Aang pouted. "When you say it like that, it doesn't sound so great." Zuko just groaned and flopped against the mattress, throwing his arm across his eyes. "I can't believe you woke me up for this. Hey, this is serious. What if I really did see Roku? And what if you were just dreaming? Maybe you just saw what you wanted to see." Aang went quiet. Zuko raised his arm slightly, peering out from the gap to see him sitting with slumped shoulders and a dejected look on his face. "Oh geez." Repressing a sigh, Zuko removed his arm from his face and sat up again. "All right, did anything else happen in your dream?" "It was like the sun came out from behind clouds." Aang grinned and once more leaned forward. "Actually, yeah. I tried to run towards Roku, but when I did the mist just got thicker and I got lost, and I kind of freaked out because no shiny thing appeared this time to help me find Roku again, but then this deep voice was all, 'Come, Avatar Aang,' and I turned and was like floating above the ship, and then the world just kind of whooshed forward, except I think I was actually going south, and..." "Aang. Breathe." He laughed sheepishly and rubbed the base of his neck. "Right. Sorry." Zuko shook his head in reluctant amusement. Aang made a big show of taking a breath and then told the rest of his dream, thankfully with actual pauses and less meandering. He explained that he sped over the ocean until he came to this little trio of islands. One of them was quite big and looked populated. Then he heard the deep voice again, saying, "Come," and the dream ended. "I've had a lot of weird dreams," Aang said, "but I don't think this was a normal one. It felt like a message from the spirits. It felt real." Zuko frowned. "You didn't recognize the islands?" "Nope. Never seen them before in my life. Maybe they're part of the Fire Nation." "I don't think so. I've actually traveled quite a bit in the Fire Nation, well, at least 100 years ago. Anyway, like I said, when I was doing that whooshy travel thing, it seemed like I was heading south. But there's only the Southern Air Temple and the Southern Water Tribe south of here, and they're both more to the east." His brow creased. "Unless..." "What?" "Yuzo and Shizue. I'm pretty sure they said the Fire Healer tribe lives on an island in the far southwest." Aang's eyes widened. "Do you think?" "I don't know, but I think we'd better call a meeting. If you're right and your dream is the work of spirits, this will change our plans. Then let's call a meeting." Zuko latched onto the back of Aang's collar before he could dash off. I meant let's call a meeting when everyone is actually awake. But Aang, it's not even dawn. Let them sleep. Let me sleep, he wanted to add. He and Katara had stayed up really late the previous night, and firebenders were not night owl cats. Frankly, Zuko was exhausted. Aang drooped like a wilting flower. Fine. I guess it can wait a few hours. But I'm not going to be able to sleep now. Try. I can't. I'm too awake. He twisted to face Zuko, smile flashing. I know, we could. No. Zuko, who still held the back of his collar, picked him up by the fabric and carried him towards the door. I'm tired. I need sleep. You go try sleep. But Zuko dropped him on his feet outside the cabin. Don't come back unless the sun is up. Then he shut the door on Aang and collapsed face first onto his bed. A tired flick of his hand snuffed the candle. Hey, Zuko. He just groaned and clamped his pillow over his head. Oh. The meeting was a shambles. Those who had been requested to attend gathered in the mess hall and took their seat around one of the long tables. Zuko's mom, Yuzo, Utsuo, and a still recovering Shizue were quick to confirm that Aang had dreamed of the Ito Islands, home to the Fire Healer tribe. Then everything went downhill. One of the biggest issues was that some people, including Shizue, doubted whether the dream could be trusted. Shuren knows how to manipulate energy, Shizue reminded them, and not just the energy within humans either. Remember, she was able to put an ancient spirit to sleep. She also knows the Avatar has lost his connection to his past lives. This could be a trap. Or the spirits sent me a message and this is what I need to do, Aang retorted. Yes, but if it's from Shuren. We don't know that. The two kept bickering back and forth, others joining in with their own concerns. Zuko frowned as he listened. There was no doubt that traveling to the Ito Islands would be dangerous. The tribe were not welcoming to outsiders, caring only about maintaining secrecy. Even without the silencers, and there were plenty of them, Shizue informed that many of the tribe were highly trained warriors. Going there would be suicide, Shizue said frankly. We have no idea how deep Shuren's control is over the tribe. We all know she can control those bonded to her, not to mention she could be heading there herself. It would be better to stay away. I have to agree, Hakata said, folding his arms across his chest. It sounds like a lot of risks to take just for a dream. Aang flushed. It wasn't just a dream. I'm telling you that the spirits want me to go to the Ito Islands. This is how they communicate with me. This is how it works. Katara squeezed his shoulder, then looked up at her dad. I know you're worried, Dad, but Sokka and I have been traveling with Aang for a while now. This stuff happens sometimes, and it always works out when we follow whatever instructions are given. Right, Sokka. I guess, he said with a shrug. Never made it any less dangerous, though. Remember the swamp? That was Hugh who attacked us, Aang pointed out. The spirits just wanted to bring me there so I could see a vision of Toph and find the Airbender sanctuary. Wait. Toph perked up a little. You had a vision of me? He rubbed the base of his neck. Yeah. I needed an earthbending teacher, and the swamp showed me a vision so I'd know you were the one. Did you have a vision of any of your other teachers? No. Knew it. Toph stretched out her legs, looking far too smug. Even the spirits know I'm the most important. Zuko rolled his eyes. Toph, this really isn't the time. She shrugged but continued to look like a smug cat fox. Anyway, Aang said loudly, shooting a frown at Toph, the point is that now I know I need to go to the Ito Islands if I want to reconnect with my past lives. That's what the dream told me. Or it's a trap, Shizue said. Aang made a frustrated sound, complete with throwing his hands up in the air and going a bit red in the face. This time it was Zuko who gripped his shoulder in a calming way. He could see the poor kid was about to blow. Look, Zuko said, glancing around at everyone gathered, regardless of how you feel about the dream or the Ito Islands, Aang is the Avatar. The dream came to him. He thinks following the voice will help remove his block. Maybe we should just trust him on this. Aang looked like he wanted to hug Zuko. Blind trust is a little hard to give when lives are at stake, Hakata said, still frowning. Zuko looked down, stomach twisting. He remembered the Water Tribe warriors who had been killed on Wu Yao's island. Of course Hakata would be wary. All the rules of battle had been changed now that mind control and energy bonds had come into play. There are other places Aang could enter the spirit world, right? Suki said. Iroh mentioned the swamp and the Northern Water Tribe oasis. I did, Iroh allowed, but I'm inclined to go along with Aang. The spirits work in mysterious ways, and I find it difficult to believe Shuren was able to communicate with him through a dream, regardless of her abilities. Perhaps this is just what's best for Aang. For what it's worth, I agree with Graham Iroh, Ty Lee chimed in, elbows propped on the table. Shuren is super scary and powerful, but she doesn't have a bond with Aang, and it's her bonds with people she seems to rely on. See? Aang said, rounding back on the naysayers. It'll be fine. It will not be fine. Shizue retorted. Even if the dream is as real as you claim, the Ito tribe is not. Ursa placed a hand on Shizue's arm. It was like the instant soothing of a storm. Shizue went silent and stared at her questioningly. Do you feel that strongly that you are meant to go to the Ito Islands, Aang? Ursa asked. Aang nodded. Then that is what you shall do. Ursa. Shizue's eyes widened. You know the tribe won't. Yes, it will be risky, Ursa cut in before Shizue could get going again, but that does not make it impossible. What we need is a plan. Sokka sat up straighter. A plan. Ursa and Iroh exchanged a glance. Both had been relatively quiet during the meeting, but there seemed to be a mutual understanding between them now. We split up, Iroh said. A few of us will go with Aang to the Ito Islands and... What? Katara exclaimed. You want us to split up? I'm afraid separating was always inevitable, Iroh said. Remember, it is crucial that we stop Fire Lord Oze before the comet arrives. He went on to remind them how Aang, as they all knew thanks to Avatar Roku's warnings, was supposed to be the one to defeat Oze, but right now Aang couldn't access the Avatar state. There were 3 concentrated points of spiritual energy that they knew of, the Spirit Oasis, the Foggy Swamp, and the Ito Islands. Aang had to go to one of them if he wanted to get his abilities back. Unfortunately, the Spirit Oasis and Foggy Swamp were too far by boat. No one would make it for the Eclipse invasion. The Ito Islands are closer, but there still isn't time to sail there and back to the Fire Nation, Ursa said, shaking her head. Flying is the only option. And that meant limited room on the saddle. Katara tried to argue, saying it would be safer for everyone to stick together, but Iroh was firm in his response that the Eclipse wouldn't wait, nor could they. Sure, the Eclipse would only offer them a small advantage, but that was still better than nothing when invading the capital. Plus, their allies were already on the move to get to the rendezvous point. We need to be there, Iroh said simply. We have no choice but to sail straight for the Fire Nation. Mai looked him dead in the eyes. And if Baldy gets held up on the dangerous islands? Ideally, Aang and those who go with him will join us before the eclipse. If they can't, we will have to fight on our own. A grim pause. Katara's fingers curled into her palms. And who's supposed to go with Aang? That is what we need to discuss. Needless to say, the meeting went on for a long time. Oh. The mood was somber as everyone dispersed from the mess hall. Are you sure about this, Ursa? Shizue asked with a frown. It's bad enough we're taking the Avatar back to the tribe, but Zuko as well? I thought you wanted to keep your son safe. It seems foolish, doesn't it? Ursa glanced across the deck to where Zuko was talking with Aang. I tried to hide him from the tribe for all these years and now I'll guide him to them myself. It would be better if he stayed on the ship with the others. No. Ursa turned to face her. Even if Shuren is targeting him, he's the only one strong enough to go against her. We can't afford any mistakes. This world needs its avatar. Then you think she will go back to the tribe? Ursa shook her head in a helpless gesture. I don't know. I just feel that this is how it's meant to be. Shizue raised her eyebrow. You just feel. I guess you could say I'm more in tune with things now. Both eyebrows went up. Ursa scratched at the back of her hand, lowering her gaze. There were effects from being possessed by that spirit. What? Why didn't you say anything? We have to. It's fine. Plus, I don't think this can be fixed. Shizue's brow creased. Ursa smiled and touched Shizue's arm. Don't look so troubled. It really isn't so bad. I talked to Iroh and he said a similar thing happened to him after he traveled to the spirit world. It's like a heightened sense. I just get a feel for things now. And what do you feel? She glanced towards her son. That Zuko and Aang's destinies are tied. We shouldn't separate them. Shizue frowned but said nothing. Honestly, the one I'm more worried about is Azula, Ursa admitted. I don't think we should leave her behind. You aren't seriously suggesting we take her with us? She's fragile. If I leave without her, I worry she'll react badly. Shizue sighed. Fragile or not, you know that girl is a danger to herself and to others. Perhaps, but she is my daughter. Ursa's voice softened. I failed her once, Shizue. I don't want to fail her again. I certainly don't want to send her back to Oze. She will be better off away from him. Then you'd better convince everyone that it's in their best interest to let her go with you. I know, but somehow I don't think that's going to be easy. Oh. Katara sat on a crate in one of the more secluded parts of the deck, foot swinging slightly as she glowered at nothing. Soft footsteps approached. You got pretty fired up back there, Suki observed, stretching her arms above her head before taking a seat next to her. Katara hunched into herself more. Are you going to tell me I'm being too emotional as well? No. I get why you're mad. They were both quiet for a moment, just staring out at the ocean. I'm not really mad, Katara mumbled. I just don't think it's a good idea to split up again. We're stronger together. We've always been stronger together. I mean, what if something goes wrong, but we're not there to help? She clenched her hands hard on her lap. We've had so many close calls. It's hard to be the one left behind, Suki agreed. With a war like this, though. She shook her head and her tone grew distant and a little sad. Sometimes there isn't a choice. Sometimes necessity forces you to fight away from those you care about. Katara sat up straighter, glancing at Suki's profile. Like you and the Kyoshi warriors. A nod. I'm sorry. You must miss them. Every day, Suki admitted. They're my friends, my sisters, my family. The Kyoshi warriors are everything to me. So, why did you decide to come with us? It was something Katara had often wondered, though she'd never figured out a tactful way to ask. She hadn't wanted Suki to get the wrong idea and feel unwelcome. Suki let out a breath. Because I knew it was the right decision. I love the Kyoshi warriors, I love being their captain, but this war has been going on for 100 years. In the same way I knew I had to leave Kyoshi Island, I knew when I ran into all of you again that I couldn't go back to protecting refugees either. Not this time. She frowned at her lap. I guess you could say I just realized I could make a bigger difference if I followed you. Well, for what it's worth, I'm really happy you came with us. I like having you around. Suki smiled. Thanks. I like being with you all as well. Especially Sokka. Katara nudged her in the arm. Suki's smile tightened a bit, though it was only for a split second. Well, he is cute and funny, and he's a really good kisser. Ugh, gross. I didn't need to know that. Hey, you went there first. Lesson learned. I will never tease you about my brother again. Suki laughed. The two girls settled into silence again. Katara leaned forward on her palms, once more swinging her feet a bit. Try as she might, she couldn't stop thinking about the meeting or, rather, the fact she hadn't even got a choice in saying where she would go. The adults had decided she would remain on the ship and somehow that had been that. Zuko and Aang had seemed to just accept it as well. Though, if she were to be honest, it was more Zuko's acceptance that bothered her. After everything they'd been through together. I hate this, she muttered. HRM. I really don't want us to split up. I mean, I get why they have to limit the number of people who go with Aang, and I get that they don't want to bring too many outsiders to the tribe, but I can fight. I can heal. I can help. Suki's mouth twitched. Are you sure it's the splitting up part that's bothering you? Sounds like you just want to join Team Bison and Spirit Mumbo Jumbo so you can rush into danger with them. You know, you really don't have to use my brother's labels. I think this might be one of his worst. I dunno. It's kind of catchy. Suki poked her in the ribs. And don't think I don't realize you're trying to change the subject. He touched Katara's cheeks. She should have known she wouldn't be able to escape the conversation. Okay, fine, she said heavily. I want to go with them. Shuren is targeting Zuko, not to mention we only just got him back. And Aang. He almost died in Ba Sing Se. I watched over him every day he was in that coma. She frowned at her hands. I'm not used to being apart from them. I don't want to be apart from them. Suki squeezed her shoulder. They'll be okay. Will they? Katara had always been known as the optimistic one, but there had just been so many close calls. Not to mention there were things she had done to protect her friends that made her own heart seize and shiver. Even now, she remembered how it had felt to bend Ursa's blood, the heady pulse of power and control, the sickening ease of it all. She could have stopped Ursa's heartbeat with a simple twist of her fingers. But that wasn't what scared her. What really kept her up at night, waking from nightmares in cold sweats and with her heart thumping, was the thought of what would have happened had she not been there. In Ba Sing Se, on Wu Yao's island, all those desperate moments. The simple truth was that, without her, Zuko and Aang probably wouldn't be alive right now. Ursa would likely still be possessed. How was she supposed to let them leave? When Katara voiced these concerns, Suki went quiet, expression pensive. You know one of my biggest regrets. Suki said softly. What? I wasn't there when Sis died. Sis? You had a sister. Those were the wrong words to blurt. I'm sorry would have been much better, but Katara was stunned. Suki had never mentioned anything about a sister or family. Fortunately, Suki wasn't offended. She just shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. Not blood-related. Mum died when I was young, and I don't know who my dad is. But Sis, she took me in. Raised me. How did she die? Katara nodded. Pirates. They used to come sometimes, raiding for rare goods and snatching people with blue eyes. Blue eyes. Katara blinked. Why people with blue eyes? Suki balled her hands into fists. The Fire Nation had bounties out for waterbenders. Kyoshi Island has history with the Southern Water Tribe, though as far as I know, no one on Kyoshi is a waterbender. But sometimes this still happens. She pointed at her own eyes, which were bright blue. Katara swallowed against the sudden dryness in her throat. Oh no, oh no. She did not like where this story was going. So, when I was 11, these pirates came to our village. Sis was the captain of the Kyoshi warriors then. I wanted to fight beside her, but she said I was too young and that I'd just make myself a target. Suki closed her eyes. A lot of the warriors were killed that night. Sis, her body was never found. I'm so sorry. It was all Katara could say, even as her fingers worked their way to the necklace around her throat. She'd had no idea the people of Kyoshi Island had suffered such raids. Suki played with her tunic. A part of me used to hope she was still alive out there, maybe injured or kidnapped by the pirates, but as the months passed, I realized she wasn't coming back. Deep down, I think I'd always known. A small exhale. The thing is, I doubt it would have made a difference if I'd fought at her side. I just hate that my last memory of Sis was the two of us arguing. I hate that I'll never know what really happened, that I never even got to bury her. You wanted closure. Yeah, I wanted closure. Katara pulled her into her arms. Suki returned the embrace briefly before pulling back. You're probably wondering why I'm telling you all this, Suki said with a wry smile. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you feel that strongly about sticking with Zuko and Aang, then make it happen. Fight for your place at their side. We don't know what the future will bring, but at least you'll be there with them. At least you won't have regrets. You're right. Katara stood up. I can't give up so easily. Suki smiled and gave her a light push to her back. Then go get your spot on that saddle. Katara took a few steps only to pause, glancing back over her shoulder. Suki. Yeah. I think your sis would be really proud of you. You're one of the best warriors I know, but more than that, you're a great friend. Surprise glinted in Suki's eyes and then she laughed. Stop it, you're going to make me blush. Katara smiled at her warmly before dashing off down the deck. Time to get that spot on Appa's saddle. Oh. In the end, 8 or 9, counting Momo, were to head for the Ito Islands. Ursa, Shizue, Aang, and Zuko were a given. Yuzo and Itsuo would also be accompanying, and Katara and Azula were the last-minute additions. There had been some unhappy murmurs about Azula joining them, but then, as Ursa had rightly pointed out, if they felt Azula couldn't be trusted that much, taking her back to the Fire Nation would be a worse decision. Not everyone was happy about Katara going either. Hekata had tried to get her to reconsider, but she'd won herself allies in Aang, Zuko, Yuzo, and Itsuo. Ursa had clinched the matter by saying she owed Katara her freedom and wasn't about to turn her away if Katara really wanted to come. They would make it work. So the 8 packed up their things and made their goodbyes. Katara hugged her dad and brother tight enough to hurt her own ribs, but her heart was at peace when she settled on the bison with the others. This was the right decision. Her family would be okay, and she was going to make sure Zuko and Aang would be okay as well. We'll see you at the rendezvous point, Iroh said. Aang nodded and gripped the reins. Yip. Then they were flying and leaving the ship far behind. Chapter 2, The Ito Tribe. Ursa tied the grey cloth around Aang's head so his arrow tattoo was covered. His airbender attire had also been replaced with a tunic and pants in greys and dullish reds, which had been found on the ship and adjusted to fit his small frame. Remember, you can't let anyone know you're the Avatar, she warned. You're going to be Kuzan, Lee and Rulan's younger brother. Hear that, Zuko? Aang said with a grin. We're brothers now. Zuko gave him a distracted smile before shifting his attention back to his mother. What about Appa? Won't that be a giveaway? Not at all. The Ito Islands are actually home to a herd of air bison. What? Aang practically floated in the air. There are flying bison there. She nodded. Aang gusted in a blur of color to dangle over Appa's face, trying to hug as much as he could. You hear that, buddy? You're not the only one. This is amazing. He continued to chat with Appa and Momo, his delight as warm and bright as the sun. Azula frowned. So, Zuko and I will be twins, and the bald brat will be our younger brother. What if people notice the family resemblance between us, mother? They won't. How can you be so certain? Ursa spread her arms. Look at me. It was an invitation to see how haggard and thin she had become. Her beauty had been ravaged by sunken eyes and jutting bones, and in that the traces of her which could be seen in her children were indeed barely recognizable. She went on to assure them that no one would think to question the lie too much. The easier truth to swallow was that Shizue and Ursa had found a free walker, Lee, and brought him and his family back to the islands with them. Yuzo and Itsuo, of course, would act as if they had run into them and decided to peaceably return. Katara bit her lip. I understand why we can't be ourselves and all, but is it really necessary to make Zuko my husband? Color darkened her cheeks. Couldn't I be a cousin or something? I wondered that as well, Zuko mumbled, his own face heating. I'm afraid that won't work, Ursa said frankly. We don't want to stretch the connection too much. It would be different if Katara could be a relative of Yuzo's, but everyone in the tribe knows his family. Or what's left of it, Yuzo muttered, even as he translated for Itsuo. Shen's my only living relative. Katara lowered her gaze. Oh. I didn't think it would be a problem, Ursa said. Aren't you two dating? Dating? Katara squeaked, going bright red. Zuko, meanwhile, had choked on his own spit and fell into a coughing fit. Itsuo leaned over and patted him on the back, though his mouth twitched a little as if he was trying not to laugh. I get the feeling I mistook the situation, Ursa observed. I'm sorry. I just assumed. We're not dating, Katara managed to get out. We're just friends. Azula snorted. Zuko shot her a frown. She raised her eyebrow and glanced between him and Katara. It didn't help that Yuzo, Utsuo, Aang, and Shizue looked just as skeptical. Zuko's face got even hotter. Even the tips of his ears felt warm. Geez, everyone had really thought he and Katara were dating. We're not in a relationship. Katara and Zuko insisted, then exchanged an awkward, blushing glance. Well, you'd better get used to the idea of being in one, Shizue said bluntly, because you're going to be acting as husband and wife while we're on the Ito Islands. That's the only way she gets in without the tribe wanting to imprison her on the spot. Katara bit her lip and once more glanced his way. Her cheeks were still flushed, and he knew by the warmth radiating from his own face that he looked much the same. Is that okay with you? She asked. I don't mind if you don't. I'm okay with it. Ursa clapped her hands. Then it's settled. Now just don't forget your covers and hopefully this will be enough to get us through. And if it's not? Azula questioned. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Oh. The Ito Islands were hidden behind a veil of fog. Shizue explained how the surrounding sea was rough, full of jutting rocks, and giant sea serpents. There was also a passage that was by no means an easy feat to navigate. In short, most people who dared to sail this far never made it to the main island. How did the tribe settle here then? Katara asked. How do any of you even leave? I mean, silencers are always going back and forth, right? There is a legend passed down in the tribe that the fire healers who fled the massacres were led here by an ancient spirit, Ursa said. It took them through the waters to where they could be safe, and it has protected the tribe ever since. We ask for its blessing every time we leave. And we have sea charts that show the safest path, Yuzo put in. Ursa smiled. That too. Aang twisted around to face them, reins gripped in his hands. What kind of spirit? What's its name? The legend didn't say, but when you spoke of your dream and the voice that called to you, I wondered if perhaps you had heard the Ito tribe's guardian. Perhaps the legend is true. Zuko's brow creased. If the legend was true, that meant the spirit had helped Shurin as well. He wasn't sure what to think about that. Look, Shizue said, gesturing ahead as the wall of fog began to lessen. We're here. They broke through the misty shroud and came into a sphere of sunlight and clear skies. Zuko's eyes widened. He and Katara leaned over the saddle, stunned at how the three islands below were perfectly contained within the mist. Wow, Aang said in open wonder. It's like we're in the eye of a storm. Isn't it? Ursa smiled at their reactions, though Azula just sat with her left arm tucked in a sling and doing her best to appear unimpressed. The fog has always been there like a barrier. It never clears, never encroaches. We're not even sure what creates it. Zuko continued to peer over the saddle as Appa drew closer. The three islands were positioned like a triangle. One was small, a mere blip of rock and shore that had a few scraggly bits of vegetation on it. The next one was round, had no real beach, and was covered in a forest. Then there was the biggest, which at least from their aerial view was a pattern of grassy plains, forests, and cliffs. A small river could be seen tracing a path and breaking off into smaller streams like silvery veins. I can't believe this place has been here the whole time, Katara murmured. Azula smoothed a wrinkle from her tunic. I'm more concerned with what kind of greeting we'll receive. Looks like we'll soon find out, Shizue said, eyeing the group of people waiting for them on the high, grassy plain, which Appa was fast approaching. The welcoming committee is already here. I guess the sages sensed us coming. Utsuo's hands moved to form words, his expression tense. Yuzo signed something back and rubbed his shoulder in a reassuring gesture. Something wrong? Katara asked. He's anxious, Yuzo said. We did run away from the tribe after all. That's usually a punishable offense. I thought having Ursa and Shizue with you meant there wouldn't be any problems. There shouldn't be, at least nothing major. Yuzo shook his head. Don't worry about it. Utsuo always panics last minute. Utsuo gave him a light whack on the arm for that comment, though all he earned was an unrepentant grin. Zuko swallowed and focused his attention on the group of people below them. There were about 30 of them, all dressed in hooded outfits of browns and greens to blend in with the grasslands and trees. Their faces were covered by wooden masks. Some of the warriors had bows in their hands, others grasped swords or spears. Then there were those who held no weapon, perhaps firebenders, or chi blockers. His heart thumped uncomfortably fast. He really hoped Mum and Shizue were right that the tribe would buy their lies. Appa slumped to the grass not far from the group, letting out a tired rumble. Aang praised him for all his hard work and jumped off his perch. Zuko and the others joined him on the ground and faced the warriors. It took all of Zuko's self-control not to shift into a defensive stance. The masks gleamed in bronze-gold paint and had been carved to look like some kind of beast with two jutting, lower fangs. Hardly a welcoming sight. His instincts screamed threat, threat, threat. Ursa stepped forward and placed her fist to her palm, lowering into a bow before the masked warrior at the head of the group. She offered a formal greeting and began to explain the story of how she and Shizue had found a free walker and his family, though she'd barely got into it before the warrior held up a hand to silence her. Zuko's heart thumped faster and there was a tense moment as the group of 8 or 10, including Momo and Appa, all glanced at each other. Had they been discovered already? The warrior removed the mask, revealing an older woman with reddish-brown eyes and rather familiar features. Zuko couldn't place why she looked so familiar until Itsuo made a strangled sound, drawing his attention. The woman and Itsuo looked almost identical. Same nose, same eyebrows, same jet black hair. Itsuo signed something to her. She gave him a long, hard look before she sheathed her Jiun sword and turned her back on him. It was like being slapped with cold. Even Zuko cringed at the obvious snub. "This way," the woman said in a clipped tone. "The sages are waiting for you." There seemed to be no choice but to follow. The warriors had them surrounded, and though Zuko glanced at his mum as if to ask if this was really the best idea, all she did was nod. Mindful of the fact they had roles to play, Zuko stuck close to Katara, Aang and Azula as they began to trek for the forest. The unmasked woman was still in front and had not bothered to look back, not even at Itsuo, who just looked crushed. His shoulders were so slumped it was like he might sink into the ground. Zuko leaned closer to Yuzo. "Who is that woman?" "That's Jo, the head warrior of our tribe. She's Itsuo's mum." "His mum?" Katara said, eyes widening. But she completely ignored him. Yuzo's gaze flickered to the stocky woman striding at the lead. Jo is probably mad that he left. No doubt she considers his behavior a betrayal and a dishonor to their family. Itsuo hunched more into himself, shoulders creeping up to his ears. Yuzo seemed to realize he was only making things worse, as he was quick to sign an apology in what looked like reassuring words. The two continued to talk to each other in their silent language. Zuko left them to it and focused on keeping his expression calm, despite the nerves tingling under his skin. He really didn't like being surrounded by so many masked people with weapons. They entered the forest and soon came to a stone archway that overlooked a path leading farther into the trees. Katara nudged him and pointed out how the beast's face that adorned the masks was the same as the one etched onto the archway. "Hey, you're right," Aang said, joining them by the archway and tilting his head from side to side. "It doesn't look very happy, does it?" Zuko pressed his palm to his forehead. Making it look happy would defeat the purpose of why they use this creature on their gates and warrior masks, Accusation. Aang shrugged. "Well, if it were up to me, I'd want my mask to look happy." A choked laugh came from one of the warriors near them, who must have overheard the comment. Aang grinned and tried to strike up a conversation with the person. Katara, meanwhile, had turned to Mum and asked what the creature was meant to be and why it was so special. Mum said it was supposed to represent the Ito spirit guardian. Zuko's brow furrowed as he glanced at the unnerving masks all around him. Now that he thought about it, he was sure he had seen that beast's face before. Cho led them into an underground passage, much to Appa's displeasure. Those who could bend fire lit the way. Eventually, they came to a pair of stone doors, again etched with that strange creature. Cho knocked twice, paused, and gave a final knock. The doors groaned and rumbled as they were pulled open from the other side. Then Zuko could only blink. This was no small village. There were 3 levels to the main cavern at least that he could see, all connected by bridges and stone steps. Dome-shaped houses and buildings dotted everywhere. Light filtered in golden streams from the small openings in the cavern roof, but there were also gleaming crystals jutting from the rock and torches fixed into sconces. At the far end of the cavern, steps rose up and up to what looked like some kind of 2-storied temple. I don't know why, but I was expecting something smaller, Aang said, scratching his cheek. All of the tribe lives in these caverns, Yuzo explained. The caves keep going, but we mostly stick to this area. It's safer that way. Zuko continued to look around curiously as they headed for the temple. People bustled about, men, women, and children, but they stopped and stared now. Whispers hummed. It was difficult to tell whether the tribe was intrigued by the sight of the newcomers or just distrustful. By the time they reached the temple steps, many of the warriors had separated off down other paths. Only a dozen remained, including Cho. Small, pillar-like structures cradling fire led in 2 rows to the entranceway. The temple itself was simple, with an image of the sun and 2 more of those strange creatures carved over the door. Shota, you remain with the bison, Cho said in her clipped way. The rest of you follow me. He has a name, you know, Aang said with a frown. It's Appa. Cho gave him one of those long, hard looks. The silence got awkward. Don't mind my brother. Azula moved to stand behind Aang and placed her hand on his shoulder, no doubt to give him a warning pinch. He's a little overprotective of the fluff ball. Aang stared at Azula's hand, then laughed a bit nervously. Yeah. Cho said nothing and walked up the steps to enter the temple. The warrior who had stood on her left guided Appa off to the side, while everyone else was left to go inside. Incense hit with a faintly floral scent. 7 people sat on cushions at the opposite end of the room. These had to be the sages. The 7 wore red robes and were a mixture of women and men, some silver-haired and wrinkled like old parchment, others who looked to be around their 40s. Zuko glanced at the walls and saw they had been etched with murals, most featuring people creating energy bonds. Definitely a temple for fire healers. So, you have indeed returned. It was the man seated in the middle of the row of sages who had spoken. His voice was as frail as the thinnest of rice paper. He looked like he was withering away, as well, a small, hunched thing with only tufts of silver hair left. His eyes drooped a little as if he were about to fall asleep, but when Zuko caught his gaze, it was to find himself trapped by piercing, pale gold eyes. Ursa stepped forward and bowed low. Shizue gestured at the others with a hand behind her back for them to do the same. Once the bowing, introductions and formalities were out of the way, Ursa explained their cover story in a calm, respectful tone. Shizue was then called upon to add her input. Finally, the wizened leader of the sages, Undying, asked Zuko and his family a few questions. Zuko was glad that his mum had prepared him for such an interrogation. He had never been a good liar, especially not when put on the spot. You seem a bit young to be married, an elderly lady named Kem observed, looking between Zuko and Katara. Lee turns 17 this year, Ursa offered. Oh. Her gaze drifted to Katara in question. What about you, Kana? I, actually turn 15 tomorrow. You do? Zuko and Aang blurted. Both boys froze as they realized their mistake. I mean, of course Kana's birthday is tomorrow. Aang declared with a huge smile. I totally knew that. How could I ever forget my favorite sister-in-law's birthday? Zuko resisted the urge to facepalm. This was getting more and more painful. Fortunately, Katara didn't miss a beat. You forgot my birthday, Kyuzan. She made a show of pouting, then turned to Zuko. And what's your excuse, HRM? A teasing smile curved her lips and she pressed herself against his side, poking his cheek with her finger. A good husband would remember his wife's birthday. Pink bloomed under her fingertip. He cleared his throat. Sorry. Azula rolled her eyes. Newlyweds. That one muttered line seemed to satisfy Cam. She smiled indulgently at Zuko and Katara and wished them a happy marriage and plenty of children. Thanks, Zuko mumbled with a blush. I guess. A few more questions were tossed at the group. Then Teo, a thin man who looked to be the youngest of the sages, chose to speak up. Fascinating as this all is, he said, I admit I'm curious to know where Lady Ursa and Shizue have been these past 3 years. It is strange that we received no word from either of you. Ursa didn't even twitch. Perhaps that is a discussion for after. Lee and his family are surely tired and need to be settled in. Don't you agree? Indeed, Kim said, and her gaze shifted to Atsuo and Yuzo. Besides, there are other things we still need to discuss. Atsuo and Yuzo grimaced. That sounded like ITO tribe sage code for deciding on a punishment. With that decided, Zuko, Katara, Azula and Aang were prompted to bow again before they were dismissed and ushered off by 3 warriors. Where are we going now? Katara asked. To your new home, one of the warriors said. I hope you'll like it. Oh. Aang settled on one of the cushions in the main living area and helped himself to some fruit. Momo scampered over to join him. I thought that went pretty well, Aang declared in between mouthfuls of pear. Azula raised her eyebrows. You really are an idiot. His brow furrowed. She rolled her eyes in a rather dramatic way. They're suspicious of us. Huh? But they let us in. They even gave us this house. And now there are warriors lingering outside. You think that's because they have nowhere else to go? Katara rubbed her arms as if to chase off a shiver. It's like Ba Sing Se all over again. Pretty much, Zuko muttered, collapsing on a cushion next to Aang. We'll have to be careful. Aang looked sadly at his half-eaten pear. You think they'll turn on us like Long Feng did? Azula let out a small snort. Everyone stared at her. I'm sorry, I just find it pathetic you even fell for Long Feng's traps. Hey, we knew he wasn't trustworthy, Aang retorted. We just. That makes it even more pathetic. Katara pursed her lips. You don't get the right to judge. We all know what you did in Ba Sing Se. Azula's eyes flickered with something sharp. Well, at least I wasn't a fool who got caught in other people's schemes. No, you just went around starting revolutions and betraying everyone who got near you. I did what was. What was what? What was necessary? Azula's eyes narrowed. You know, I can understand why you got rid of Long Feng. I can even understand why you started the revolution, but Sokka and Smellerbee told me what happened with Jet. Katara shook her head, her voice hardening. What was your justification then? Did you tell yourself his death was necessary as well? You don't know anything, peasant. I know he cared for you. I also know you killed him. Azula's fingers twitched as if resisting the urge to curl into fists, her expression, however, was ice smoothed on stone. I gave Jet the choice to surrender. He refused. So you just killed him. That fool was consumed by his hate for the Fire Nation. It was an obsession. I knew he wouldn't back down, and I still had a city to conquer. Well, it was all for nothing because you still lost in the end. Katara's voice got tartar. Oh, and let's not forget how you tried to kill your own brother after he healed you. You're lucky we even. Okay. Zuko stepped between them, not liking the dark glint growing in his sister's eyes. We all remember what happened in Ba Sing Se, so let's just leave it there. A sharp smile suddenly curved Azula's lips. Why? Worried I'll hurt your precious peasant. You wish, Katara retorted, raising her chin. You wouldn't even be able to touch me. Is that a challenge? Aang cleared his throat, albeit a bit hesitantly. Maybe we should. Oh, be quiet, Azula snapped. If I want your opinion, I'll ask for it. Don't talk to him like that. Or you'll do what? Shout at me some more? Go ahead. Blow all our covers while you're at it. Zuko pinched the bridge of his nose. He had might as well be invisible for all Azula and Katara were taking notice of him. Worse, their argument was only escalating. Katara, can we talk? He muttered, grabbing her arm. She protested a little but didn't resist his light tug. Soon, he was closing the door to one of the bedrooms, shutting them both in. Aang would just have to deal with being alone with Azula for a bit. Your sister is infuriating. Katara exclaimed. And why did you pull me away like that? You make it look like I'm the one in the wrong. Sorry. I didn't know how else to get you two to stop fighting. He shrugged. She doesn't exactly listen to me. That's because she's a horrible person. Zuko didn't refute the claim. Katara took this as a sign to continue to rant about how much Azula was the worst. When she was finished, she was breathing hard, her cheeks a little flushed, and had her hands clenched. Better? He asked. A rueful laugh escaped her. No. I don't think it'll matter how much I vent, she'll still make me angry. My sister tends to have that effect. Katara sighed and sat on the bed. She's just so unapologetic. It was easier to ignore on the ship. I can even admit I felt a bit sorry for her, but now. I know. He joined her on the bed. But she has helped us. Quite a lot, actually, and not just back on Wu Yao's island or with Ty Lee. Azula's lying skills were far superior to his. Katara and Azula had made a good tag team back in the temple. I'm not saying she can't be helpful, Katara allowed, but sometimes she drives me crazy. I just don't understand how someone can be so callous. It's like she doesn't care at all about others, not their feelings, not if she hurts them, not anything. She's always been that way. His mouth twisted a fraction. Father loved that about her, of course. She was the perfect daughter. If by perfect you mean cruel and manipulative, then yeah. He lowered his gaze, picking at the blanket with his fingers. It was a moment before he spoke. Mum says we should try to be patient with her. Katara scrunched her nose. I know. Easier said than done, but I think Azula actually has got better. Are you kidding? You heard the way she was talking back there. He picked at the blanket more agitatedly. Look, I know she's not an easy person to be around, but I almost gave up on her before. After basing SE, I really thought that was it. I thought there was no hope for her. But then all this stuff with Shurin happened and I do think Azula has changed. Maybe only a little, but she's trying. Well, she has a funny way of showing it. I wasn't much better when I was still hunting Aang. He looked her in the eyes. You hated me then, you know you did, and I'd be the first to admit I deserved it. But I'm different now. Maybe Azula can change as well. Katara lowered her gaze. You know, I actually thought the same when I visited her on the ship. One of the reasons I tried to help her was because she reminded me of you. Of me. She nodded, then let out a small sigh. But after hearing her talk about Jet and all that happened in Ba Sing Se, I just don't know anymore. He was quiet for a moment. There was a heavy, wriggly weight in his stomach. Can I ask you something? Of course. Is it because of Jet that you got so mad before? A light flush touched her cheeks. Why would you think that? It's just, you were so adamant in Ba Sing Se that we should stay away from him, but then you seemed pretty upset when you found out he died, and with the way you talk about him now, I just wondered if... If what? If you still had feelings for him. Katara's eyes widened. Is that what you think? That I have feelings for Jet? I heard you used to have a thing for him. Did Sokka tell you that? She scowled at a random point on the wall as if seeing through it to her brother's face. I bet he did. That gossiping little. So it's true. She blanched. What? No, I just... Jet was just... A heavy sigh. Okay, yes. I had a crush on him. Back then, I hadn't met many boys around my age, and he was attractive, charming. He made me feel pretty. He looked after all these kids and he seemed so brave. The wriggly weight in Zuko's stomach got more unsettled. It sounded like she had really admired the guy. She frowned and drew patterns on her knee with her finger. Jet was the first boy I kissed. The only boy I've kissed. I really liked him, but then he tried to trick me into drowning an entire town of people. Her fingers curled into her palms. I wished I'd never met him after that. I still do. Then, you don't have feelings for him. She shook her head. I got over that crush a long time ago. I think now I'm more just. I don't know. Sokka said Jet went to Ba Sing Se to have a fresh start. Maybe he actually wanted to change, Maybe he could have changed in time, but instead he met my sister. They both went quiet. I heard he fell in love with her, Katara said softly. That's how she manipulated him. She used his feelings for her against him. Some might say it's poetic justice after what he did to me, but I can't get any satisfaction from it. She killed him, Zuko. She killed him and she doesn't even seem to care. His brow creased. I'm not sure if that is the case. Angela isn't always easy to read, and she definitely is lacking when it comes to empathy, but she said she gave him a chance to surrender. That's kind of a big deal. Angela never offers mercy to anyone. Katara scrunched her nose. You really set the bar low for her, don't you? I grew up with her. I learned not to expect much. That doesn't make her behavior okay. No, I know. Believe me, I know. His frown deepened. But I think I'm also beginning to understand her a little better. Maybe. She sighed and rested her head against his shoulder. Then you're doing better than me. I'm not sure I even want to understand her. Sometimes I don't either, Zuko admitted. Like I said before, I'm not denying it's hard to be around her. I feel it too. Honestly, sometimes when I look at her all I see is lightning. I see the way she smiled when she tried to kill me. Katara stilled and looked up at him. But she is trying. She put herself at risk to protect me, lost the use of her arm and everything. I can't not give her at least a chance. I mean you all gave me one. His mouth curved a little, if a bit sadly. And I don't think I would have made it on my own. Blue eyes held his for a moment. Then she simply slipped her hand in his and nestled back into his shoulder. Well, how can I argue with that? A beat. But if she tries to hurt you again, I'm not holding back. He laughed. Fair enough. Chapter 3, It's Different. A welcome feast was to be held that night. Shizue came to collect them and act as their guide. Much to Zuko, Angela, and Katara's relief, she also brought with her a stash of warmer clothes for them all to change into since the shift from summer to winter had not been easy on any of them. The Ito Island's climate was relatively temperate, but it was still cold in the caves. Only Aang turned his nose up at the clothes. I don't need those, he said frankly. I don't even like wearing all these layers. He tugged at his gray undershirt, which had long sleeves. Well, right now you are supposed to be a firebender named Kyuzan, not an airbender who doesn't feel the cold. Shizue thrust his bundle into his chest. Get dressed. But it's got fur on it. So what? Angela said, already doing up the ties to her fur-lined tunic. I'm an air nomad. We don't wear things like this. Shizue folded her arms across her chest. If you don't wear it, it'll look suspicious. But. No buts. Aang looked to Zuko with pleading eyes. You can't force him, Shizue, Zuko said in what he hoped sounded like a confident voice. Even he had trouble standing up to her sometimes. People will think it odd if he doesn't wear something thicker, she pointed out. Do you really want to draw more attention to yourselves? Katara placed her hand on Aang's shoulder. We'll just have to take that risk. It's not fair to force him to do things that go against his culture. Aang smiled up at her. So sentimental, Angela said with a roll of her eyes. It's just a bit of fur. The monks taught us that. Yeah, I really don't care. She cast a glance at her brother. I expected Miss Bleeding Heart to behave this way, but you should know better than to encourage him. You know what happens when you let compassion outweigh logic. Zuko's fingers curled into his palms. Just leave it, Angela. You know I'm right. And if I did everything your way, you wouldn't even be here. You would have died in that throne room. They stared at each other for a tense moment. Then her lips curved into a sharp smile and she held her hands palm up. Fine. We'll do it your way. Just don't blame me if things go wrong. She stalked out of the room without another word. She is so aggravating, Katara grumbled. Zuko sighed. But it's true that people will think it odd. He turned to Aang. We won't force you to wear the fur, but you're still going to have to wear some layers and act like you're cold, okay? Aang nodded. It's habit to bend the air around me, but I can stop doing it. He must have done so then, as he immediately started shivering and huddled into himself. Oh, that's cold. How do you guys deal with this all the time? A laugh escaped Katara and she pulled him into a hug, warming him with her own body. We can't have you freezing. Let's find you some air nomad friendly layers. Shizue just pinched the bridge of her nose. All of you always have to make things more complicated, don't you? Oh. The feast was held in a large cavern that opened up to the stars. Low tables of food had been set out and people sat around them on cushions. Zuko and the others had been seated at a table of honor near the front, though warriors always lingered close. It was easy to spot the ones on duty thanks to the creepy masks they wore. I still can't see Ursa, Zuko said, correcting himself at the last second. He leaned past Aang to look at Shizue. Isn't she coming? A frown creased her brow and she glanced at the high table where the sages sat, though Undying, the head sage, was missing. She said she'd meet us here. Hey, there's Atsuo and Yuzo, Aang said, and waved energetically at the two boys as they headed for a table a couple of rows down from them. Yuzo gave a half-hearted wave back, but Atsuo kept his gaze fixed down, shoulders slumped. He looked like he wanted to sink into the stone. I'm guessing they didn't get let off that easily, Katara said with a frown. She was seated on Zuko's right, close enough that their arms often brushed. Actually, the sages chose to let them off with community service work, Shizue said, but Cho is not so forgiving. Aang scratched his cheek. That's Atsuo's mom, right? A nod. I hope he'll be okay, Katara murmured. Zuko frowned. Azula also said nothing and continued to sip her drink from where she sat on Katara's other side. He wondered if she, like him, was thinking of their father. Oze had never been forgiving either. The feast continued. Several performances were put on for their entertainment. Aang was delighted by a group who put on a fire dance, which he claimed was pretty similar to a dance that had used to be performed during the Sun Festival back in the Fire Nation 100 years ago. One of the tribesmen farther down their table must have heard the comment, because he stared as if Aang had grown an extra head. Zuko elbowed Aang in the side. Or so I heard at school. Aang laughed nervously and rubbed the base of his neck. I went to school, you know. Azula sighed and placed her cup down hard enough to draw attention. Really, Kyuzan? With the way you talk sometimes, people wouldn't think you've studied anything except how to be a noisy brat. Hey. She smirked. The tribesman smiled at their antics, seeming to accept the explanation, and went back to talking to his neighbor. Zuko met his sister's gaze, almost tempted to mouth a thank you at her. She merely gave him a cold, unimpressed look and resumed eating. Well, he supposed that was to be expected. She was still in a mood with them for ignoring her earlier advice. Two girls who looked not much older than him began to sing a song, accompanied by a woman playing the guhun. Zuko rested his chin on his palm as he listened. The melody was haunting and flowing, nothing like the rigid, boring things he'd been forced to play in school, which had always been about the greatness of Fire Lord Sozin and the Fire Nation. Instead, the song reminded him of the ones his mum had used to sing when he was a child. A breath escaped him. No, it was one of her songs. She'd even taught him and Azula how to play it. Azula stiffened and cast a quick frown at the trio. Perhaps she had recognized the song as well. Ursa entered the cavern with the stooped sage, Undying. She parted from him at the front, joining Zuko and the others at their table in the space next to Azula. Undying went to sit at the head table with his fellow sages. The bruise-like shadows under his mother's eyes seemed darker and there was a strained look about her, but she still smiled when she caught his gaze. Is everything okay? He asked. Everything's fine, Lee. Please enjoy the feast. His hand balled into a fist on his lap. It was so frustrating having to pretend not to be her son. There were so many questions he wanted to ask her, like where she fit within the tribe and how she'd even ended up married to his father and living in the Fire Nation with a silencer for a handmaid. It was obvious that the Ito Islands were her real home. Everyone knew her here. They called her Lady Ursa and treated her like she was someone important, even though her banishment had stripped her of any royal privileges and title. Ah, I've always liked this song, Ursa said, looking towards the trio of performers. I don't think much of it, Angela said coolly. That's a shame. I seem to recall you said you were a rather accomplished Guhan player. I was hoping we could play together sometime. His mother's gaze shifted to him. You as well, Lee. I know you play a few instruments. I do, Zuko managed to get out. Katara glanced up at him. You do? He nodded. Where his father had only wanted him and Angela to focus on bending and learning war tactics and politics, his mother had encouraged their creativity. Dancing was banned in the Fire Nation, but she had pushed them towards music and art. She'd also often taken them to the theater. Angela had always grumbled about it and had eventually stopped joining them, but Zuko had secretly loved those times when they had all played music together, watched theater shows, or painted pictures. His best instrument was the Tsunji horn, however, he could also play the dragon flute, which he'd picked up because he thought it had a cool name, and, albeit not as well as his sister, the Guhan. Of course I'd love you all to play some music with me, Ursa said, including Aang and Katara in her smile. Aang offered that he could play the daisy, but Katara admitted she didn't really know how to play any instruments. That's okay, Kana. Ursa smiled warmly. I can teach you. Color dusted her cheeks. I'd like that. Angela just rolled her eyes. Music is a waste of time. When you're faced with an enemy who wants to kill you, it's not like you can defeat them with a song. No one really knew how to respond to that. Ursa just looked sad, and all Zuko could do was frown at his lap. His sister's words could have been their father's. It was like hearing him speak through her. Not everything has to be about war and defeating your enemies, Rulin, Aang murmured, also looking sad. The mo. Zuko clamped his hand over Aang's mouth. The last thing they needed was for him to start spouting air nomad monk wisdom for everyone to hear. Hey, Aang complained, pulling his hand away. I was talking. I know, Kyuzin, but you should really finish what you're eating before you speak. Aang's eyes widened. Oh, right. Zuko resisted the urge to face palm. He knew he wasn't much better at remembering to maintain their fake identities, but still. He'd thought Aang would be better at this. In the end, it almost always fell on Angela and Katara to save them. I believe what Kyuzin was trying to say, Rulin, Ursa said softly, is that music is good because it uplifts us and moves our emotions. Don't you feel something listening to this song? Angela's eyebrows inched higher on her forehead. Why would I? It's just a song. Tone and demeanor were sharp, but Zuko remembered the way she had stiffened earlier. His sister did feel something, whether she wanted to admit it or not. Even she couldn't erase memories. Oh. It was a relief to escape from the feast. Quite a few people had come up to speak to them during the more informal part, but for all the celebratory food and smiles, a part of Zuko had felt like he and the others were being tested somehow. It was like everyone in this tribe was just waiting for them to make a mistake so the warriors could come down hard in stabby, burning wrath. When he said as much to his mother, she laughed and said that was exactly what was happening. People don't trust outsiders easily here, she warned, then leaned in closer to whisper in his ear. Don't let your guard down too much, not even in your home. There will always be eyes watching and ears listening. He paled. That might be a problem then. She raised her eyebrow in a silent command for him to explain. Very quietly, he told her about the arguments and general carelessness they'd already displayed within their little cave house. A frown creased her brow, but all she said was that they should be more careful from now on. Their priority was to get Aang's abilities back. Until then, they couldn't afford to take unnecessary risks. Live the lie, she concluded. That's the safest thing you can do. She wished them good night once they reached their house and promised she would come find them the next day when she got the chance. In an undertone, she added that after 3 years of being away with no explanation, she had her own suspicions to alleviate. Shizue was in the same boat. We'll do what we can, but I'm afraid our assistance will be limited, Ursa said. You might have to work this out on your own. Don't worry, Lady Ursa, Angela said, enunciating each part of her title with cool precision, we're used to being left on our own. A flicker of pain passed over Ursa's face, but she only inclined her head slightly and once more wished them good night. Then she and Shizue continued down the rocky path. "Don't you think that was a bit much?" Zuko muttered at his sister. "What? I was just stating a fact." She smiled before she turned her back on him and entered the house. He ran a hand over his face, smothering a sigh. "You okay?" Katara asked, moving to stand next to him and rubbing his arm in a soothing gesture. "It's just my sister. She's been in a mood all evening and keeps taking it out on Ursa. HRMM, someone else I know used to do that too when he was in a mood. Hey, Kyuzin, you remember when Lee here used to get all moody at us?" Aang had been happily snuggling with Appa and Momo, but he turned to them now. "Oh, yeah. That sucked." Heat crawled on Zuko's cheeks. "Well, sorry about it." Katara laughed at his disgruntled tone, though her expression sobered a second later. "Look, I don't like your sister or her attitude, but I think maybe she's just trying to work through her own things." That was probably true. Just because Azula had always been better at restraining her emotions didn't make her automatically good at coping. In fact, he knew from the breakdowns he'd witnessed and what he felt when he connected with her energy that there was a lot of deep-rooted turmoil festering inside her. "Come on," Katara said gently, tugging on his arm. "Let's just go inside and get some rest." He allowed her to steer him to the door, though they both paused to tell Aang, or rather Kyuzin, to come inside with them. Aang jumped down from Appa. "Gimme a sec. I wanna see if they'll let Appa out now. He really hates being shut up like this." He dashed off to one of the lurking warriors, who seemed a bit startled to be approached. Two other warriors were soon roped into joining the conversation. Eventually, Aang came back with slumped shoulders. "Let me guess," Katara said, "it was a no. They said I can let him outside tomorrow, but tonight he has to stay in here. Something about precautions and newcomers, blah, blah, blah." Aang dragged his feet over to Appa and flopped against his furry face. "Sorry, buddy. I tried." Appa let out a low rumble. In the end, Zuko had to practically carry Aang inside the house. Most people, as he pointed out to a protesting Aang, did not prefer to sleep in the cold with an air bison and lemur when they could be inside, on an actual bed, with a fire to warm them. But Appa doesn't like the caves and Appa is a big boy bison. "I'm sure he'll survive one night." Zuko suddenly frowned. "And no sneaking out later to sleep with him." Aang pouted. "How do you know that was what I was planning?" "Because I know you." Zuko gave his back a slight push. "Now go get some rest. You can see Appa again in the morning." Katara covered her mouth to suppress a giggle. "What?" both boys said. "You two are more like father and son than brothers." Zuko pulled a horrified face, but Aang seemed to see the funny side in it and decided to call him Dad for the rest of the night until he was forced to bed. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Aang only did it because he knew how much it irritated Zuko. Oh. Why did you put that idea into his head?" Zuko complained once he and Katara were alone in their room. Following his mum's suggestion to live the lie, it made sense for a married couple to share the room with the one bed. Plus, even Katara agreed that putting her and Azula together was an argument waiting to happen. That did mean Aang and Azula were left to share the other room, but neither seemed to care all that much, Azula because she disliked them all equally, and Aang because he was such an easygoing, sunny person. "You mean about the dad thing?" Katara said as she tugged the tie loose from her hair. "I'm sorry but it's true. You do act like his dad sometimes." "Well, you act like his mum." She shrugged, not denying it. His eyes followed her movements as she ran her fingers through her unbound hair to remove any tangles. It was oddly mesmerizing. Shaking his head slightly, he turned away from her and removed his overcoat and tunic so that he was left in his undershirt and trousers. She also stripped out of her bulky layers and moved to slip under the furs. Aang had made a fuss about those as well, but Shizue had managed to get him some koala sheep wool blankets instead, which while not as warm, still did the trick. Zuko joined her under the furs, careful to keep a respectful distance between them. It was Katara who stomped all over that by snuggling against him. An icy touch brushed against the exposed skin on his neck and legs, and he lurched back. "Your hands and feet are cold," he protested. She laughed and pressed herself even closer, tangling her legs with his and sneaking her icy hands under his shirt. Then warm me up. His heart stuttered. Even his scarred eye widened. The cheeky smile she flashed him made his heart pound even more. It didn't help that he was all too conscious of her hands on his bare skin, especially since the cold shock was fading. Pulling himself together, he grabbed her arms and eased her hands out from under his shirt, then shifted his hold to cover her hands with his own. It only took a bit of concentration to let warmth radiate from his palms. He did the same for her feet, except the warmth seeped from his legs. Perk of being a firebender was that he could make heat emanate from any part of his body if he really wanted. "Oh, that's nice," she said happily, closing her eyes. "All you had to do was ask. You didn't have to put your cold hands and feet all over me." But where's the fun in that?" He nudged her with his foot for that comment, earning a slight twitch of her lips. Her eyes, however, remained shut. Zuko watched her in the soft glow of the fire for a moment, still holding her hands, until tiredness made his own eyes close. It wasn't long before they were both fast asleep. Oh. Happy birthday. Aang beamed and thrust a bowl of winter fruits under Katara's nose. "I made you breakfast." "You cut up some fruit," Azula said dryly. "I hardly think that's an achievement." Katara pursed her lips at Azula. "It's still a nice gesture, but I guess that's something you wouldn't understand. I'm nice to those who deserve it." Zuko snorted. "Must be a short list." "Exactly. Not many deserve it." He shook his head, knowing well what his sister was like. Katara glowered at her a moment before raising her hands in a resigned gesture. "You know what? I can't be bothered dealing with you right now." She turned and gave Aang a hug. "Thanks for the breakfast." "You're welcome, though if I'd known earlier that your birthday was today, I would have prepared you something better. I'm perfectly happy with this." He beamed again. Azula made a show of rolling her eyes. "I think I just lost my appetite." Katara's temple twitched. "No one asked you." "I know." An almost sweet smile. Zuko placed his head in his hands. This was even worse than when Mai and Katara had used to clash all the time. "What about you, brother?" Azula said, shifting her attention to him. "Did you give a nice birthday gift to your wife this morning?" He raised his face from his hands. "Given that she was still asleep when I got up this morning, no." "Ah, I see. You two had all your fun last night." Katara choked on a slice of mandarin. "What? Oh, so you did." "No." Zuko and Katara retorted, both red-faced. Azula actually laughed. "You're too easy." She stood up. "Anyway, I've had enough family for one morning. I'm going to go explore, see if I can find anything interesting." "You sure you want to go alone?" Zuko asked. "Why?" "Offering to join me." She said it archly, like she didn't expect him to follow through on an offer to spend time with her. Maybe she had a point as well, for even he was surprised when the words slipped from his mouth. "Do you want me to?" Something flickered in her expression, slicing through the haughtiness in a ripple of hesitancy. She plastered on one of her sharp little smiles. "Oh, I wouldn't want to steal your time today. It's your wife's birthday, remember? You should spend it with her." Katara huffed something under her breath, but Zuko just continued to stare at his sister. He hadn't forgotten what Katara had said last night about Azula's snide attitude and the comparison with his own past behavior. He also hadn't forgotten what his mum had told him. "Try to be patient with your sister. Mum wouldn't want you to go alone," he said, not quite meeting her gaze. "Plus, we haven't had much time to just catch up." The hesitance was back in her eyes, however slight. Then she turned away. "I think I'll pass." Zuko watched her leave the house, not sure if he was sad or relieved. Everything in him felt like a weighty, tangled mess. "You tried," Katara said, leaning over and placing her hand on his knee. "And to be honest, it's more than she deserves." He sighed. "I guess." The three of them continued to eat their breakfast. Aang was full of chatter. He explained how he'd run into the warrior he'd befriended during their trek to the caves yesterday, who had agreed to take him and Appa to the surface so they could meet the bison herd. He had wanted to go earlier, but his warrior friend had chores to finish up. "I can't wait," Aang said, practically bouncing up and down on his cushion. "I hope she comes soon." As if on cue, there was a tap at the door. Aang bolted over to open it. He grinned hugely at the warrior, who was sans mask and standing with her fist still raised as if to knock again. She was older, maybe in her early 20s, and had her black hair pulled into a top knot. "Min!" Aang exclaimed. "You made it." She lowered her hand. "I see you're as energetic as ever, kid. Can we go see the bison now? That's why I'm here." Her gaze drifted past Aang to where Zuko and Katara were still sitting around the low table. "Morning. You two interested in meeting the bison as well?" Zuko and Katara exchanged a glance, then both nodded at Min. "All right," Min said with an easy smile. "Let's get going." Oh. The herd of bison had made a home for themselves in the higher cliffs of the island, nestling together in the crevices and blending in with the clouds. Appa rumbled happily and took off to greet them. "Hey, wait!" Aang cried. "Appa!" Appa didn't even look back. "Oh man!" Aang pouted, shoulders slumping. "He was supposed to fly us up." Katara laughed. "What did you expect? This is the first time he's seen other bison. Still. Now we have to walk. Walking sucks." Min snorted. "Come on, kid. Some walking might help get a bit of muscle on those skinny legs of yours." "Hey, I have nice legs. My arms are bigger than your legs." This was true and had Zuko and Katara both trying to suppress smiles. As they began the steep trek, Min explained that most of the tribe didn't bother to go up to the cliffs. The climb was by no means easy and the bison weren't exactly tame. "What do you mean they're not exactly tame?" Aang asked. "Just what I said. I don't know how you got Appa to be so well-mannered. Even the bison I've managed to befriend are still skittish. They'd never let strangers pet them, let alone anyone ride them." She nudged his shoulder. "You'll have to tell me your secret." "My secret, huh?" Aang laughed a bit nervously. Katara pointed up at the sky. "Look, Appa is coming back." Sure enough, Appa swooped down towards them and landed on the slope. He gave a low rumble but didn't sound so happy now. Momo, who had been perched on Katara's shoulder, fluttered over to chitter at him. "What's wrong, buddy?" Aang asked. "Were the other bison mean to you?" Appa huffed a breath and made more low rumbles. "Ah, I'm sorry." Min leaned towards Zuko. "Your brother can't actually understand air bison, can he?" Zuko shrugged. "No idea." Aang turned to face them. "Appa said cause the bison are acting all wary of him." "It could be because he's carrying your scents," Min mused. "Should we keep going up then?" Katara asked. "Wouldn't that just unsettle them more?" "Ah, it'll be okay. We'll just keep our distance, but perhaps we can catch a ride on Appa this time." Judging by the gleam in Min's eyes, it seemed she was more excited by the prospect of flying than actually introducing them to the herd. Nevertheless, they all piled on Appa and flew up to the cliffs. Most of the bison stayed in their little crevices or just growled warily. A smaller one was curious enough to come over and give them a sniff, but it was hardly the joyful meeting Aang had been hoping for. He had gone very still and quiet. "You okay?" Zuko asked quietly. Aang gave a little shrug. "It's just different, I guess." His lips curved into a sad smile. "It's always different." Zuko wordlessly wrapped an arm around him. Aang leaned into the contact but said nothing further. When Katara suggested they head back, no one protested. Oh. The day passed in a relatively uneventful way. Zuko and Katara stuck with Aang, who wandered around hoping that he would feel something to point him in the direction of the spirit who had called him to the islands. He got nothing. "Maybe it's wherever people go to try sense other fire healers," Katara said. She was probably right, but they were in no position to go demanding entrance to that place. Zuko figured they'd just have to sneak in at some point, but best not to do that on their second day. The tribe were still too much on high alert. At one point they bumped into Atsuo and Yuzo, who wished Katara a happy birthday but otherwise couldn't stay to chat since they had to go do their punishment work. This put Zuko in mind of the fact he still hadn't got a gift for her. It had been troubling him all day. Something wrong? Katara asked. Huh? You're frowning. Oh. Just lost in thought. She let the matter drop. Even so, he continued to watch her and fret about what would be a good gift. It didn't occur to him to wonder why he cared so much. Oh. That night they had dinner with Yuzo, Shizue, and Ursa. Utsuo, unfortunately, had not been allowed to join them. Ursa had also brought some instruments for them to play. Azula excused herself from the music with a headache, but Katara seemed to enjoy having his mum teach her to play the guhun. She also fruitlessly tried to make sound come out of a bamboo flute. This amused Zuko to no end. No, like this, he said, taking it from her and showing her the proper technique. She tried again and this time got a tremoring note to come out. I did it. He smiled and showed her a few more tips. At some point, Ursa left to go check on Azula. The little party started to die down then. Aang continued to muck around on the instruments and tried to cajole a reluctant Shizue to play with him, but it wasn't long before Yuzo was standing up and saying goodbye. You're leaving already? Aang said with a pout. It's late and I have a boyfriend to cheer up. A wink. Cho thinks she can punish him by keeping him isolated, but I've been sneaking into his room for years. Aang went a bit pink. Oh. I might not catch you tomorrow, but I'll keep an ear out for anything useful. Thanks, Katara said, and tell Itsuo I'm sorry he couldn't make it tonight. Yuzo nodded, wished her happy birthday one last time, and took his leave. Zuko's heart thumped a little at the birthday reminder. Do it now, his mind urged. Kaene. She laughed at his almost slip-up. Yes, Lee. Can we, talk? Her eyebrows inched up her forehead. We are talking. I mean alone. Soft color dusted her cheeks. Oh. Sure. They stood up and entered their bedroom, leaving Aang still trying to cajole Shizue. Zuko was conscious of the moisture gathering on his palms. His heart thumped faster. For some reason, this felt more nerve-wracking than any of the stealth missions he'd done as the Blue Spirit. It didn't help that she just stared at him expectantly. He coughed to clear his throat. So it's your birthday today? She laughed a little. I know. His face heated. Right. Well, I wanted to get you a gift, but I didn't really know what to get you, and then I saw, He gave up on trying to explain and instead reached into his tunic, offering her a small gift wrapped in cloth. This is for you. From me. A wince. I mean obviously it's from me because I'm giving it to you now, but... Ugh, why couldn't he stop talking? She smiled and, mercifully, stopped his flow of words by taking the gift from him. Thank you. Is it okay if I open it now? He nodded. She unfolded the cloth, revealing a wooden comb painted with a delicate design of flowers. Her mouth formed a small O. I noticed last night you were combing your hair with your fingers, and then I saw this in the market today and I thought of you, and yeah. He rubbed the base of his neck and looked the other way, his face hot. If you don't like it, I can take it back tomorrow and exchange it for something else or... I like it. Wait, you do? Of course. It's beautiful, and it's just what I needed. I accidentally left my comb on the ship. He sighed in relief. Good. That's good. That's really good. She smiled and stepped closer, leaning up on her tiptoes. Her lips brushed his cheek, close to the corner of his mouth. Everything in him thudded to the sudden pulse of his heart. Thank you, she murmured. He exhaled a bit shakily. No problem. They both paused as their fake names were called. We should go back, he said. She nodded and placed the comb down, then walked with him out of the room to join the others. Oh. Everyone had finally left or gone to bed. Azula stood in the main living area, which glowed faintly with light from the smoldering fire in the center of the room. A guhun lay on the low table. No doubt Mother had left it on purpose. She walked over and touched the strings with her right hand, soft enough not to make a sound. In her mind, every song she had been taught replayed. She knew which strings to pluck, when to pause, how to craft it all together to make it perfect. She had been perfect then. Her lips twisted and she raised her hand, blue flames blossoming from her fingers. Are you really going to burn it? She flinched and twisted around to see the avatar watching her, cradling the lemur in his arms. What's it to you? It would be a waste, don't you think? It's such a nice instrument. Well, I find it offensive. But you used to play it, didn't you? So what? Her tone was steel and sharpness. I used to do a lot of things. He stepped closer to the glow of the fire. Will you play for me then? She blinked. What? If you're going to burn it, will you at least play one song for me? Angela blinked a few more times. Just one, he repeated, then smiled. I think that's what the Guhan would want. Really? Because I doubt it wants anything. It's not alive. It's an instrument. Maybe it doesn't breathe or have a heart, but we can give it soul with our hands and the memories we create while playing it. He shrugged. Or that's what the monks used to say. Angela raised her eyebrow. Do you actually believe that rubbish? He just smiled a bit sadly. Will you play me a song or not? She was tempted to blast the Guhan then and there just to shut him up. It would be satisfying to see his friendliness shatter, to remind him that she was not someone who could be approached so casually. There was a monster in her bones, in her soul. It gnashed its teeth for release, complaining that she had been forbearing with these fools for far too long. But Mother seemed to think she could be more than a monster. Mother kept saying she just had to try. Angela's lips twisted even more. The blue flames pulsed brighter, bigger, but then she glanced at the stringed instrument and saw herself as a child, heard the songs she had used to create. All those memories. The fire snuffed out in her closed fist. Her voice was harsh when she spoke. One song. He smiled and settled on a cushion with the lemur, watching her expectantly. She swallowed and sat down in front of the instrument. There was no way she could put the nail picks on without assistance, but the fingernails on her right hand were long and strong. It would have to do. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. Then she released the breath and started to play. Her fingers were sure, the strings plucked with perfect precision. But her left arm remained limp at her side. She couldn't hush the strings properly, couldn't do anything too complicated. Every strum was a reminder of her limitations, her imperfections. A choking thing formed in her throat, tight and constricting. She kept playing, even as her breathing sharpened and her eyes narrowed in frustration. A smaller hand joined hers on the strings and picked up the part, albeit poorly, that would have been assigned to her left hand. She glanced up and met the avatar's eyes. Gray eyes that were so similar to Ty Lee's. What are you doing? She hissed. Helping. I did not ask for your help. I know, but I wanted to give it to you anyway. His mouth curved into a small smile. That's what friends do, you know. She removed her hand from the strings. You are not my friend. I could be. Her fingers twitched, itching to bunch into her palms. He really was like Ty Lee. Same openness, same easy friendliness, as if it didn't matter that she had once pinned him down with the intention of hurting him to the point where he couldn't be a threat to the Fire Nation anymore. He had forgiven her for the hurt she'd caused him, and he made it clear in every smile, every word. She raised her chin and looked him coolly in his Ty Lee eyes. I played you a song. You can go now. But. Go. Her tone was clipped and demanded obedience. The avatar sighed and stood up, dragging his feet as he scooped up his lemur. He glanced over his shoulder at her. You don't have to do everything on your own, Angela, he said softly. I just want you to know that. Oh, and you're playing? It was really nice. Angela did not watch him leave, nor did she acknowledge him. Instead, she cradled blue fire and glared at the instrument on the table. When morning came, the Guhan was still there. Chapter 4, Bright Pink and Muddy Blue. What are you sighing so dramatically about? Sokka jumped at the sound of Mai's voice. Geez, don't sneak up on me like that. She didn't bother to respond to this comment and instead leaned against the railing next to him. So? So what? What's eating you? There's obviously something. He frowned at his hands. Promise you won't laugh. No. He gave her his most unimpressed look. Sometimes I wonder why we're friends. Her lips curved into that little twitch smile, though it was gone a second later. I won't laugh. Sokka continued to frown at her, but then he sighed and slumped more against the railing. I miss Boomerang. Wait, this is about your Boomerang. You said you wouldn't laugh. I'm not. And it was true, there was no glint of humor in her eyes. I just didn't expect that this would be what's troubling you. Hey, that Boomerang was my first weapon. Dad made it for me when I was a kid and everything. It's saved my butt so many times. It was even what? All the defensiveness seemed to deflate out of him, and he moistened his lips. It was what helped me save you back on that drill. She averted her face, showing him the unscarred side. Oh. Their hands were close on the railing. His fingers inched a bit closer, pinky almost brushing hers, but he pulled back at the last second. A small breath escaped his lips and he fixed his gaze on the ocean. That weapon was mine, you know? It was my thing. I'm not a bender, I don't really stand out at all compared to all of you, but I knew how to use that Boomerang. I was good at it. He shook his head, shoulders slumping. But now it's gone. I feel like I have nothing. I feel like I'm nothing. And that was frustrating. It was like all the doubts and insecurities that had plagued him in Ba Sing Se were bubbling back up again. Mai pressed her fingertip hard into the creases between his eyebrows. Hey. He rubbed at the spot. You know what that was for? No I don't. Here I am trying to have a serious conversation with you, and you just decide to poke me in the head. That's because you're being dumb. He opened his mouth to retort, but she placed her fingers to his lips. My turn to talk. He swallowed, conscious of how her skin brushed the hypersensitive part of his lower lip. You've always been more than a guy with a boomerang, Sokka. You're smart. You pretty much planned the whole counter-attack against Azula and Ba Sing Se, not to mention all the strategies you've come up with for the eclipse. And you are a good warrior. I've seen you fight plenty to know that. His eyes widened a fraction. He'd never heard her give so many compliments not to anyone. She removed her hand from his mouth. So don't say you're nothing. A weapon doesn't define you. Boomerang or not, you're still you, and... Faint color touched her cheeks. I like that guy I've got to know. I like being with you, even if you do make dumb jokes sometimes. It felt like his breath had got lost somewhere in his throat. You like me? Her eyes widened like a startled deer fox. She stepped back and looked the other way, though not before he caught the way her blush darkened. I mean as a friend. Obviously. Right. His heart stumbled a little on its rhythm. Obviously. Nervous tension. Awkward tension. Her explanation lingered between them, flimsier than a cobweb. It would be so easy to tear it down. The truth already stared at him from the tawny eyes that snuck glances his way and the memory of an almost kiss on a beach. He swallowed again. The space between them suddenly seemed charged, little ripples of sparks tugging him closer. When the sea breeze ruffled her hair, his fingers itched to trace the path of the short black strands that caressed and cradled her face. My, eye. She turned more towards him. Scarred. Beautiful. His gaze flickered to her lips, then back to her eyes. Thunk. They both flinched. Xi and Bato's voices rose up in a swift scold at some poor sod from farther down deck, but Sokka didn't pay attention to their words. The moment had been shattered, and with it came all the sinking weight and wriggling knots in his stomach. Suki. His girlfriend was Suki. I should go, he mumbled. She didn't stop him, and he knew he should be grateful for that. It would be dangerous to keep towing this line with her. Yet when he glanced over his shoulder, meeting her eyes for one poignant beat, the weight pressing down on him only seemed to get worse. He had to go, but everything in his heart whispered stay. Oh. And that's how you fully paralyze a person with chi blocking, Ty Lee said with a broad grin, even as her volunteer, Tomoki, groaned at her feet like a limp fish. Any questions? Hands immediately shot into the air. Almost everyone had gathered in the mess hall for Tai Li's lesson. She'd explained how not even Shuren was immune to chi blocking, which had resulted in a request for her to teach anyone on the ship who was interested. There was no saying what the future would bring. No one wanted to be bonded and controlled by Shuren if they could help it. They'd all seen what happened to her victims. Does it come with an unblock technique? Tomoki ventured. I still can't move. Oops. Sorry, cutie. Tai Li returned him to full mobility and then got everyone to split into pairs so they could practice doing the basic motions, though without actually attempting to chi block. She walked around and gave pointers. Suki and Saka ended up being partners, which would have been fine had he not been finding it increasingly more uncomfortable to be around her. His chest felt heavy and his stomach was a wriggle of knots. The worst part was that she had done nothing wrong. It was all him and his stupid, muddled feelings. Involuntarily, his eyes scanned the room and found Mai standing off to the side. She'd come to the lesson in a show of support for her friend, but it seemed she had no desire to learn chi blocking. Toph soon joined her and the two girls started chatting. Hey. Suki's hand waved in front of him. Space case. He blinked. Sorry. They kept practicing. Tai Li came over and praised them both for picking it up so quickly, though she did notice that Saka's approach was a little different to what she had taught. I learned some techniques from Shizue, he explained with a shrug. Really? Her hand latched onto his arm and she flashed a quick smile at Suki. Sorry, gorgeous, but I'm going to borrow your boyfriend for a bit. I'll find you a new partner. Saka and Suki barely had time to blink before he was whisked off. He offered some feeble protests, which were ignored, and soon found himself acting as Tai Li's assistant. It actually wasn't so bad. Shizue's style was much more aggressive than Tai Li's, and that allowed for a bit of variety and blending of the two. Not everyone, after all, could be as evasive and acrobatic as an airbender. Of course chi blocking isn't something you can master in a few weeks, Tai Li warned them at the end of the lesson. This is a skill that takes precision and speed. I'll teach you what I can, but in most cases you'll be safer sticking to your weapons or bending. Saka couldn't argue with that. Her warning was exactly why he'd continued to rely on his weapons even after learning from Shizue. Powerful as chi blocking could be, there was no room for mistakes and he was by no means a master. It was best to view the skill as a just-in-case thing for now. Suki came up to him afterwards, bumping his arm with her own. You've been holding back on me. He didn't respond. His gaze had sought Mai again, and he was too busy wondering if he should approach her or not. They hadn't talked much since their little moment on the deck. In fact, he was pretty sure she was avoiding him. Logic told him this should have been a good thing, should have made it easier. But he missed her. Missed her dry humor, the way her lips twitched when she was trying not to smile. Saka. Huh. He blinked at Suki. Oh, sorry. What were you saying? Some of the brightness faded in her eyes. Nothing. It doesn't matter. He tilted his head in question but didn't push further. She'd tell him if it was actually important. I'll see you later, she said, patting him on the arm. I thought you wanted to get some extra training in after this. You know, the two of us. Changed my mind. I think I'll just practice some more on my own. Are you sure? I can. It's fine. Her lips curved into that teasing smile he knew so well. A girl needs her alone time as well. Oh. Okay. She smiled again, then walked off. An arm suddenly came around his shoulders, and he jumped a little as he found Tai Li next to him. Oh, cutie, you messed up. Huh. She nodded at Suki's retreating back. Aren't you going to follow her? But she said she wanted to be alone. Actually, what she said was her dummy boyfriend is making her feel like she doesn't mean anything to him, so she'd rather not spend time with him right now. Her lips quirked. You're the dummy in this situation, by the way. His eyes widened. What? How can you even know? Trust me. But. Come on, cutie, I thought you were smart. He frowned and once more thought over his conversation with Suki. She hadn't seemed that upset. She'd even smiled flirtatiously, though now that he thought about it, he supposed her smile had been a bit strained. "Are you sure?" he had to ask. "I'm basically a girl whisperer." "Girl whisperer? I'm good with girls." Reading between the lines, figuring out what they want. She wiggled her eyebrows, keeping them satisfied. "Oh. A beat. Wait, was she saying what he thought she was?" She tugged him closer by the arm she had slung over his shoulder. "Anyway, my point is that Suki isn't too happy with you right now. So, what are you gonna do?" "You said I should follow her." "Wrong. I asked if you're going to follow her. That's a completely different thing." His nose scrunched. Ty Lee was confusing. "Look, I know something is troubling you," she said more gently. "Your aura is normally such a lovely orange color, and while it's exciting to see some bright pink in there, there's also a lot of muddy blue." The look he gave her couldn't have been more flat. "Come again." She giggled and removed her arm from around him. "You look just like Mai when you give me that expression." His heart stirred a little at the mention of Mai's name, though his expression did not change. "I don't speak auras, Ty Lee. I don't believe in auras." "Most people don't," she allowed with a shrug, "but I can see them, and yours is telling me that you're scared." "Scared? To admit the truth? To be honest about your feelings?" His gaze skittered to where Mai and Toph were now heading out of the mess hall. The silence dragged. "It's okay. You can tell me. I won't judge." He frowned at his hands. "I'm not really scared. I feel guilty. Because you don't like Suki in that way anymore." "No, I do. I do like her. She's amazing and beautiful and funny and... But then there's Mai." A breath whooshed from his lips. "How did you know?" "I'm a bit of a boy whisperer as well." She winked. Sokka once more frowned at his hands. "All right, fine, I do like Mai." There. He'd said it. It was out there now and couldn't be taken back. Ty Lee let out a delighted shriek and clapped her hands. "I knew it." "Hey, not so loud." "Sorry." She sobered immediately. "So, you're feeling guilty because you like both of them?" "Yes." "No." He groaned and clutched at his hair. "I don't know. Everything is so confusing. Suki is my girlfriend and she's been nothing but amazing to me, but Mai was special. Mai had become his best friend and so much more. He couldn't imagine not having her in his life." "Talk it out," Ty Lee said. "It'll help you sort through your feelings." He sighed and sat down on one of the benches. She joined him, hugging one leg to her chest so she could rest her chin on her knee. The two of them were the only ones in the mess hall now. Sokka took a moment to gather his thoughts. I guess I just feel like I'm not allowed to like Mai. I was already dating Suki when we started to get close, and I tried my best to shut those feelings down because I didn't want to do that to Suki, but the truth is... What? I'm not sure I ever really loved Suki." He swallowed, fingers curling into his palms. "I like her. I'm not saying I don't, but when I ran into her again at Half Moon Bay, I was still trying to get over you. You. My first girlfriend. I thought she was the one. It was love at first sight and it all happened so fast, but it was perfect. She was perfect." His voice took on a weighty tone. "But during the Siege of the North, she gave up her life to become the new moon spirit." Ty Lee's eyes widened. "Wow. A blink. I mean, I'm so sorry. That must have been so hard for you. It's just, wow. Your first girlfriend turned into the moon." A sad smile was tugged out of him. "Crazy, right?" He exhaled and shook his head. "The thing is, for a long time I blamed myself. I couldn't let go of the guilt, and I couldn't let go of her. So when Suki turned up in my life again and still seemed interested in me, I didn't know what to do. I was confused, guilty, but I also liked being around Suki. I guess I wanted to try. I wanted to try move on, and I thought it was what you would want for me as well. So you agreed to date her?" He nodded. Suki chose not to travel with us then, but I accepted that. We knew we'd meet again eventually, and I was still busy helping Aang. I had no idea I'd end up falling for Mai. He let out a heavy sigh. Yeah. Ty Lee made a humming sound, tapping her finger to her chin. You said you don't think you've ever really loved Suki. Does that mean you love Mai? Well, Warmth spread all over his face. I'm going to take that as a maybe. He covered his face with his hands. Okay, maybe yes. Maybe I do. But it just crept up on me, you know? I didn't plan for this. I didn't plan to have all these feelings. Hey. I get it. Love is pretty uncontrollable. His shoulders slumped. Yeah, well, now I just feel like a big jerk. I don't want to hurt Suki. I owe it to her too. See, that right there is your problem. He blinked. The only thing you owe Suki is the truth. You rushed into a relationship with her when you weren't sure of your own feelings, and that's totally understandable. No judgment here. But love isn't stagnant. It can't be forced either. Then you think I should break up with her? I think you need to make a decision. If you really want to be with her, then fine. Forget Mai. Work on what you have with Suki. She placed her hand on his shoulder. But don't stay with her out of a sense of obligation. Don't force yourself to love her if you've already given your heart to another. That'll only hurt you both. He went quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Ty Lee nudged him with her elbow. Hey, wanna see something cool? What? She whipped out her hand from her pocket and suddenly a little marble was spinning round and round in the space between her hands. Sokka stared. And stared. Then his lips twitched and laughter bubbled free. That's Aang's trick. Yip. Geez, she even wore the same stupid grin as him when she did it. He taught it to me before he left, she explained. Even let me borrow his marble. He also promised to teach me how to make cakes with airbending when he gets back. Sounds like he's not teaching you very useful skills. The happy brightness in her eyes dimmed and she let the marble drop into her palm. Who says they're not useful? All he could do was blink. She was kidding, right? Shuren taught me how to use the wind in ways she thought useful. I can make ships go faster, I can hurt people. If I really wanted, I could even use this marble to kill someone. One wind-powered hit to the head, and bam. You're dead. His eyes widened. That was some creative thinking. Ty Lee sighed, shoulders slumping. But I don't care about those things. I want to learn other stuff. I get that, but I mean, there's a war going on. Just because there's a war going on doesn't mean that fun has no place in this world. If anything, I think it's even more important. The corner of his mouth lifted a fraction. No wonder you and Aang hit it off so well. He says the same thing. Used to drive me nuts. She smiled, though the expression seemed softer and more for herself. We do get along well. I've never met someone so in tune with me. Maybe it's an airbender thing. A shrug. Maybe. Silence settled between them, natural and comfortable. Hey. He bumped her with his shoulder. Wanna show me that trick again? Her grin flashed. You got it. One spinning marble coming right up. It really was a dumb trick. Still, he smiled as he watched her make the marble zip round and round, able to understand now that she'd only done it in the first place to cheer him up. Ty Lee was a good friend like that. He was glad to have her on his side. Oh. The moon was bright that night. Sokka leaned against the railing and admired the way she lit up the sky. It was something he often did, though the sting of grief had lessened of late. He still felt sad, but it was a different kind of sad. Less bone deep and more like the sigh for a dream that couldn't be. I'll always be grateful I met you, he whispered. He didn't think he'd ever forget her. She'd always be his first love, always have a special place in his memories. But he also knew that his heart didn't belong to her anymore. Somewhere, somehow, he'd given it away to another. You had made her choice when she'd offered up her life, and now he had to make his. Sokka let out a breath and turned to head towards the cabins. He paused when he spotted Suki approaching him. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." There was an awkward pause. In the background, he could hear Bato and his dad giving directions to someone near the starboard side. "A little more to the left," Bato said. "No, my left. My left." Sokka would have normally smiled or made a joke then, but the mood didn't feel right. Not for what he was about to do. "Suki, I think we should break up." His jaw dropped. What? It was what he had been about to say himself, but still. How unexpected. "I like you, Sokka," she said, meeting his eyes frankly. "I like you, and I want to give you a chance. But I can't keep pretending I don't see how you really feel. Our relationship can't work if your heart's not in it." He lowered his gaze. "Oh. You admit it then? You admit you don't want to be with me?" He wished for her sake he could have said no, but that would be a lie. "I think it's more that I can't be with you now," he confessed. "You're amazing, Suki. You're funny, beautiful, one of the best warriors I've met. I'd have to be crazy not to like you, but you love someone else." A hesitant nod. "I'm sorry. It just happened." She sighed. "Figured as much. It's isn't it?" "Wait, how'd you? You're really not subtle." He groaned and slapped his palm to his forehead. "I'm so sorry. You must think I'm a total jerk." He peeped at her from between his fingers. "But why didn't you say something earlier if you knew? Like I said, I wanted to give you a chance. And even if I had my suspicions, I didn't know for sure." "Oh." Another awkward pause, this one longer. "For what it's worth," he murmured, "I really do think you're an amazing person." "Thanks, but it's fine. I'll admit I wish you could have been honest with me sooner, but it's not like I'm blaming you. We went our own ways, you moved on. It happens." She let out a breath and glanced at the dark waters all around them. "Besides, if I had to lose you to someone, I guess I'm okay with it being her." "You are. She's good for you. Even I can see that." Their eyes met, and he was once again struck by how strong and mature Suki really was. In another life, perhaps he would have even fallen in love with her, at least had Mai not come into the picture. It wasn't like he was blind to the connection between them. The attraction and sparks were all there, but the depth of those feelings were more like a nice lake when compared with the ocean he'd discovered with Mai. There was no way he could ignore that. "Well, that's all I wanted to say," she said, and turned to leave. "Good night, Sokka." "Wait." She glanced over her shoulder, one eyebrow rising. "I know we just broke up and all, but I hope we can still be friends." That is if you want to. You can also tell me to throw myself in an ice hole if you'd prefer. I'll understand." Her lips curved a fraction. "We can do friends." Sokka smiled in relief and watched her until she passed from his view. He was sure things would still be a bit tense between them for a while, but he really did hope they could make it work as friends. Suki was a girl worth knowing. Oh. Come, Avatar." Aang's eyes snapped open. He could still hear the deep voice, still feel the insistent tug on his spirit. As if in trance, he pushed the blankets off him and stood up, dislodging Momo in the process. The lemur chittered in protest. Not that Aang noticed. He was already walking towards the door. "And where do you think you're going?" Azula's voice slipped through his ears, oddly distant. The command to find the one in his dream was so much louder, so much clearer. It spoke to his soul. "Hey. I'm talking to you." Blue flames blossomed to light above her palm. Aang didn't even twitch and simply opened the door and made his way out of the house. A part of him was conscious of her following, even demanding him to stop, but he couldn't. The voice was calling him and he had to follow. "Oi." A warrior stepped in front of him. "You can't just." Aang blasted him back with wind and kept walking. Shouts followed. More warriors tried to stop his path. Suddenly, blue fire surged in a wall around him. Azula had stepped in to help, even as she called him an idiot and demanded he tell her what was going on. Except his mouth didn't want to work. It couldn't. Everything was a haze: Angela, the warriors, the caves, his own thoughts. It was like he was dreaming, like his consciousness wasn't quite connected with his body. Come. The command tugged and tugged. His feet were bare and his toe caught an upraised bit of rock, skin splitting and dribbling blood. He barely noticed the pain. Idiot, what are you trying to do? Angela hissed in frustration. Can't you see there's too many of them? We have to. Her body juddered, words faltering as she took a hit from behind. The shock of seeing her fall was enough to snap him out of his trance. No! He cried. The next moment he was being taken down by a series of rapid jabs. Chi blockers! He collapsed onto his back, heart thudding like a frantic drum. He couldn't move, couldn't resist. Then the pointed tip of a Jian sword came into view. He swallowed, gaze following the length of the double-edged blade and up to Cho's face. Well, she said coolly. Looks like someone has been lying to us. Wait, I can save it for your trial. Her eyes were as cold as the touch of death. That's if you even get one. Chapter 5, On Trial. There was an awful sense of familiarity in being bound and forced to kneel on a hard stone floor. Zuko gritted his teeth, heart pounding. Everyone was there with him, even Yuzo and Itsuo. They'd all been taken by the warriors and brought in front of the sages. The middle cushion on the dais, which belonged to Undying, was empty. If we get out of this alive, I'm going to kill that cover-blowing brat myself, Angela hissed, shooting a glare at Aang. The tip of a Jian blade touched her chin. I thought I told you no talking, Cho said, and dug the blade in just enough to draw blood. Do it again and it'll be the last thing you say. Angela's eyes narrowed. Still, she remained silent. Only an idiot would push their luck. Cho stood at the front of their line with her sword unsheathed, ready to subdue or execute. Judging by her hard expression, she wouldn't care if it came to the latter. She didn't even seem to care that her son was now awaiting judgment. Undying, frail and stooped as ever, emerged from one of the shadowed side passages of the temple and took his place at the center of the sages. His piercing gold eyes swept over them, lingering on Zuko and Aang. Then he glanced at Cho. Thank you for gathering them here. She bowed slightly and moved to the side, though her sword remained unsheathed. The other warriors surrounding them did not relax their guard either. You all know why you're here, Undying said, eyeing the group with an unreadable expression. The punishment for entering the tribe under false pretenses or abetting outsiders to do so is death. We have never made an exception. Ursa bowed as best she could while bound. Please allow us to explain, head sage. Oh, you will explain. To bring outsiders here is one thing, but the Avatar. Aang winced, shoulders slumping even more. No doubt he was beating himself up for getting them caught, though it sounded like he hadn't been in control of his body at the time. I would not have brought him here if I didn't think it necessary, Ursa said. You know I would not. Teo formed a steeple with his fingers, peering down at her from the dais. And what reason can you offer us that made it so necessary? Because he was summoned. She held her head high, unflinching. The guardian spirit of our tribe called the Avatar here. A few murmurs and whispers broke out. Is this true, Avatar? Undying asked. Aang nodded and explained his dreams, along with the strange trance he'd gone into that had made him attack the warriors when they'd tried to get in his way. I really don't want to hurt any of you or expose your tribe. I'll even help you maintain secrecy if that's what you want. But there's something here that's calling to me. I heard its voice, I felt it near, and I think it can help me regain what I've lost. More murmurs and whispers. The sages exchanged a few words in hushed tones, too quiet to hear. Zuko's heart pounded and pounded. So far things seemed to be going okay. The sages were at least listening and considering, but Cho still watched them like an executioner biding her time. Her sword gleamed in the firelight. Let's say you are telling the truth, Undying said, fixing those piercing eyes back on them. Let's say the guardian spirit called the Avatar here. That does not change the fact this boy lied and tricked his way into our tribe, and you all helped him. Aang hung his head. I'm sorry. I didn't want to lie. Ursa was far less apologetic. What choice did we have? I knew you wouldn't let him in if we told you he was the Avatar. At best he would have been imprisoned. And yet granting him entry was not for you to decide, Lady Ursa. She swallowed, losing some of her boldness. The ITO tribe has survived this long because we have strictly adhered to the laws put in place by our forebears. You chose to risk all of that because a boy had a dream. He's not just a boy. Katara exclaimed, unable to stay silent any longer. He's the Avatar, and the world needs him. Zuko cringed, waiting for the inevitable retaliation, but there was only a glint of dark humor in the Undung's eyes. In all of the sage's eyes, in fact. Oh, the world needs him, does it? A woman with grey streaks threading her hair responded. And where was the world when fire healers were being hunted and killed? Where was the world when our kind were snatched from their homes and forced to heal until their energy dried up and their bodies gave out? Her expression hardened. Better yet, where was the Avatar? Katara opened and closed her mouth, flailing for the right defense. That is all in the past, Ursa said smoothly. Perhaps the world did turn on fire healers once, but that does not mean we have to turn our backs on it now. The Fire Lord must be stopped. Avatar Aang can do this, but right now he needs our help. He needs our guardian spirit's help. I know he was summoned here for a reason. Of course you would say that, Ursa, Teo said with a faint sneer. We all know how much you hate your husband, especially after he forced you to abandon your children. Plus, given your ancestry, it's no wonder you decided to assist the Avatar. Ancestry? Zuko blurted before he could stop himself. Avatar Roku is my grandfather, she explained. Zuko's jaw dropped. What the heck? Why had no one ever told him that? How had such a thing even been kept secret? He glanced at his sister and saw a mirror of his shock. It seemed she had not known either. Regardless of what you think, Sage Teo, my grandfather has nothing to do with this, Ursa said. I brought Aang here because it was the right thing to do. He is destined to bring balance to the world, and it seems our guardian spirit is now a key in helping him to do that. She looked at each sage challengingly. Would you really go against the wishes of our guardian spirit? There was a tense pause. The sages glanced at each other and once more spoke in hushed voices. Zuko couldn't claim to be the best at reading body language, but it seemed to him that some were being persuaded to their side, however reluctantly. Perhaps there was hope in salvaging this mess after all. What of the others? Cam, the elderly female sage, asked. Gone was the friendliness from the other day, her eyes were sharp like a hawk fox. These three claimed to be the Avatar's family, yet that can't be true. Kuzan is a fabrication, Ursa admitted, but the others are who they say they are. Lee, Ruelin, and Kana simply took the Avatar in when he needed their help. I was the one who convinced them to act as his family. I also persuaded Yuzo and Itsuo to go along with our story when we ran into them. Zuko tried very hard not to show his surprise. His mother had lied. Why had she lied? Surely there was no point trying to maintain the pretense now? Undung stared at Zuko piercingly for a moment. Is that so? What a coincidence that the Avatar should find himself with a free walker for a friend just when he needs to enter our tribe. Or perhaps it's fate, Ursa suggested. We were all brought together, all led back here. Is that really so strange? Were you not the one who told me our lives are shaped by destiny? There was a story behind those words, and not a very happy one judging from the faint bitterness that edged Ursa's voice. Zuko hoped he'd be able to ask her about it later. For now, he bit his tongue and watched as Undung turned to his fellow sages for what seemed to be the final deliberation. The seven talked for a long time. Eventually, they reached a decision and Undung once more faced them with an unreadable expression. The Avatar will be allowed to stay, he declared. Zuko let out a big sigh of relief. Thank goodness. Lady Ursa and Shizue, however, must face the consequences for breaking the law. His eyes hardened. We are disappointed in you, Shizue. A silencer should have known better. As for you, Ursa, do not think that your status will spare you this time. You had no right to bring the Avatar here without first gaining our approval, regardless of how necessary you thought it. You even encouraged these children to deceive us. Ursa bowed her head. I understand. Shizue also bowed, back stiff and emotionless. Wait, Zuko said, glancing from the sages to Shizue and Ursa. What consequences? What are you going to do to them? That is no concern of yours. Of course it is. They both. Azula nudged him hard with her elbow and mouthed at him to shut up. He didn't understand. Then his mum caught his gaze and shook her head. Reluctantly, he closed his mouth, throat tight and defensive words still threatening to spill out. It was so hard to stay silent. He had never been good at playing passive spectator. Will they be okay, though? Aang asked in a small voice. You won't hurt them, right? They will live. Undung's answer was not comforting. The fact Ursa and Shizue both looked even grimmer did little to assuage the knot of unease building in Zuko's chest. Yet his mum had made it clear he shouldn't interfere. He had to trust her judgment, right? The trial was formally closed and the order given to take Ursa and Shizue away to the prisons. Zuko's heart lurched as he watched his mum get hauled to her feet. She looked so frail, so thin, and emaciated. It made his chest seize and his heart beat in erratic skitters. Wait. He burst out. You can't. A Jian sword entered his vision, the sharpened tip pointing at his face. Don't push your luck, boy, Cho said coolly. Be grateful for the mercy you have been extended. If it were up to me, you'd all be joining them. Even your own son. Katara exclaimed, eyes widening. Cho glanced at Itsuo, and something about the hard glint in her gaze made it clear she wanted him to read her lips. I might as well have no son. Raw pain twisted Itsuo's face. It was horrible to watch, like witnessing a heart be pierced and gouged. Zuko wanted nothing more than to rush to Itsuo's defense. He knew the pain of being rejected by a parent, just as he knew Itsuo did not deserve such treatment. Nor was he the only one bothered by Cho's response. Yuzo looked furious, while Katara and Aang seemed more horrified than anything. Only Azula remained calm. I'll be watching you all, Cho warned them. One misstep, one hint that you have lied to us about your intentions, and I guarantee there will be no mercy offered next time. I do not care if you're minors. I will end your lives myself. Zuko swallowed. The threat felt very real when she was pointing a sword at his face. She glared at them a moment longer before stalking off to follow the warriors who had taken away Ursa and Shizue. He was soon grabbed by his arms and yanked to his feet. The chains were removed. He rubbed his wrists to ease the tenderness as the others also get released from their bonds. You're free to go, one of the warriors said. I suggest you return home. There's been enough excitement tonight. No one moved. Azula huffed and grabbed Zuko's arm. Come on. There's no point standing around here. But Ursa and Shizue, Aang said in that same small voice. There's nothing we can do for them, she said sharply. You'll only make things worse if you try. Zuko didn't hear what was said in response. Instead, he glanced up at the dais to where the sages were making their own departure. Undung met his gaze, piercing and unreadable. Hurry up, Lee. This time he didn't resist when Azula tugged him towards the door. Oh. The mood was somber when Zuko, Aang, Katara, and Azula returned home. Yuzo had taken Itsuo to stay with him, which was probably for the best, but the trial had left an unshakable weight on all of their hearts. Aang was taking it especially hard. He huddled on the floor, face hidden against his knees, and apologized over and over even as he berated himself for the trouble he had caused. The hiccuping catch in his voice told them he was trying not to cry. Hey, Katara said, kneeling next to him and wrapping her arms around him. It's not your fault. You were in a trance. You couldn't control what you were doing. But I should have been able to. Another hiccup. I keep messing up. I keep losing control, and then things go wrong and people get hurt, and now Shizue and Ursa are. Zuko gritted his teeth. Nothing bad is going to happen to them. I won't let it. Oh, really? Azula said, raising her eyebrow. And what do you plan to do? I don't know, but I'll think of something. She laughed without humor. Typical. Well, do you have any ideas? There was a beat of silence as they stared at each other. Then she looked off in the other direction. Not yet. He almost snorted. And here I thought you were supposed to be the one who always had a plan. At least I know how to think before I act. After what happened with father, I would have thought you'd know better than to speak out of turn, but you're still the same over-emotional, impulsive idiot. He flinched, struck by the low blow. Did you even realize they were looking for an excuse to give us a harsher punishment? Of course I did, but... Really? Because if I hadn't made you shut up, you'd be in that prison as well. Maybe we all would. Open scorn glinted in her eyes. Frankly, you're all as bad as each other. It's like the concept of consequences doesn't exist to you. Katara glared at her. Well, we can't all be as unfeeling as you. Some of us actually care about others. Oh, of course, because I'm just a monster who doesn't care about anyone, right? Zuko's brow creased. There was something too brittle about Azula's tone. Even her expression was like ice put under too much pressure, cold, harsh, yet riddled with vulnerability. For some reason, he thought back to the night she'd told him their father was plotting to kill him, the way she had taunted and wounded because, as he had later come to realize, actually admitting she was worried for his safety was something she didn't know how to do. He let out a deep breath. You're not. She twitched, glancing at him. What? You're not a monster. He held her gaze, wanting her to see his sincerity. And, thank you for looking out for me tonight. For all of us. Her eyes widened a fraction. You're thanking her now. Katara said, staring at him like he'd grown an extra head. After all she just said? Because she's right. Arguing with the sages wasn't the best option, and, his gaze flickered back to his sister, she knows I tend to say too much when I get upset. That's true, Azula said. You never could hold yourself with any decorum once you got started on one of your outbursts. It used to be funny to watch when we were children, but not so much when our lives are at stake. No need to rub it in, he grumbled. Her lips curved a little. Not a sharp smile, as he was used to, but smaller. Softer. The sight was enough to make him blink. How many years had it been since he'd seen her make an expression like that? Katara removed her arms from around Aang and stood up, facing Azula. Fine. Maybe you were helpful tonight, but you don't have to act so smug about it. It's not my fault I'm the only one here who seems to be able to use my brain. Katara's eye twitched. Recognizing the danger signs of a temper about to blow, and knowing his sister was probably riling her up on purpose, Zuko stepped behind Katara and placed his hands on her shoulders. She was tense like a band pulled too tight, but as his thumb moved to brush caressingly against the exposed skin on the back of her neck, the stiffness eased out of her. Whatever, she muttered, and turned to Aang. Can you still sense the spirit? He sat up straighter, eyes a bit puffy. Not anymore. Then do you at least remember where you sensed it? Azula asked. Honestly, my memory of that whole experience is kind of foggy. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. Azula's lips pursed. I noticed. Sorry. I didn't mean to drag you into that, but thanks for coming after me and trying to protect me. That was really nice of you. She wrinkled her brow. Of course I had to go after you. You're the only reason we're here, and I would have never heard the end of it had I let you go off on your own. Even so, it made me happy. She just stared at him like he was a rubber that had started talking. Zuko almost smiled. Trust Aang to find a way to throw her off her game. He had a knack for getting under people's guard with his friendliness. Aang got to his feet. Anyway, I wish I could remember more of what I sensed and heard while in that trance, but I can't. His shoulders slumped again. I'm really sorry. Enough with the apologies, Azula said with an impatient roll of her eyes. So things didn't go to plan thanks to your little trance expedition, but it's not like it was a total waste. We know the spirit is definitely somewhere on the islands. Perhaps it will summon you again, perhaps not. At the very least, you can talk more openly to people now about finding it. That's true, he said, brightening. I don't have to hide who I am anymore. Maybe it'll be easier now. Lucky for some, Katara mumbled. The rest of us have to keep up our act. Angela raised her eyebrow. And yet you two don't seem to mind too much. Zuko blinked, suddenly conscious of the way Katara was leaning against his chest, and how his own hands had moved to lightly skim her arms. He even had his chin propped on the top of her head. She was, as he had discovered thanks to their position, the perfect height for it. Blushing, he pulled back from her. Maybe we shouldn't talk about this now. He lowered his voice. People could be listening. Perhaps there's still hope for you, brother. You actually said something intelligent. Ha ha, he muttered, rolling his eyes. Look, I'm serious. I don't think Ursa would have said all that unless it was for a good reason, so, let's just trust her. It wasn't like he didn't have a million questions either about why she'd lied, about the fact Avatar Roku was his great-grandfather. But while it was one thing to talk vaguely about their plans and frustrations, it was quite another to openly admit they were living a lie straight after being pardoned. He didn't trust the walls or the tribe. Angela was of the same mind, despite her teasing. There's nothing we can do tonight anyway. Katara chewed on her lip. I just wish we had a way to know that Ursa and Shizue are okay. I'm worried. Maybe they'll just be imprisoned. Aang offered. That could be punishment enough, right? No one said anything. Zuko could still remember the ominous words Ndung had spoken. They will live. Let's just get some sleep, he muttered. He didn't want to think about this anymore. It made his gut a mess of anxious knots. They said their goodnights for the second time and went off to their separate rooms. Zuko crawled back under the furs with Katara, but instead of immediately snuggling into him as she usually did, she lay facing him with a concerned look in her eyes. What? He said. You'll tell me if there's anything I can do for you, right? His brow furrowed in question. She moved closer, cupping his cheek with her hand. I know you've been putting on a brave face for Aang's sake. That was true enough. Aang had been so upset and full of self-blame after everything that had happened that Zuko hadn't wanted to add to it by letting the full extent of his own distress out. But it's just us here now, she whispered. And if we're quiet like this, no one will hear. His heart quickened a little, only getting faster when her thumb grazed his lips. He wasn't sure if it was an accident or not. Their faces were close and her eyes had never seemed softer. It did odd things to his stomach, like hybrid butterflies had somehow escaped and now fluttered amidst the knots tangling up his insides. She held his gaze, warm and patient, allowing him to make the next move. Whatever that was meant to be. He inhaled a shaky breath, unsure of what he wanted. Every gesture, every glance, felt weighed with something more. It made him nervous. Made him confused. His heart stuttered a beat of anguish and worry, yet his pulse whispered of possibilities. It was too much. Something shifted in her expression, and she removed her hand from his face so she could instead wrap her arms around him. Is this okay? A small breath escaped. Like a house of cards folding, he pressed his hands into her back and pulled her closer, burrowing his face into her neck. His eyes slid shut as he breathed in her scent. Yeah, he said softly. This is fine. She trailed her fingers through his hair, even as all the confusing flutters and throbs settled down in him again. Of course he wasn't stupid, he knew what it had all meant. But he was glad she had not pushed him all the same. Maybe one day he would be ready to act on those feelings, but not tonight. Not like this. Oh. Golden flames rippled around like an endless shield. The sage knelt on the floor, head bowed. You were right, he said. It did not take long for them to expose themselves. We caught the Avatar tonight. And did you do as I asked? Yes, I made sure the Avatar and his companions were not executed. Lady Ursa and Shizue had to be punished, of course. We couldn't let them all go free. It wouldn't look good. No matter. Those two are useless to me anyway. He glanced up at the figure who controlled the flames. May I ask why you are helping these children? A smile. Because I do not wish the world to be without its Avatar. His role, whether you like it or not, is important. And the other boy? Wouldn't it be easier to? Patience, friend. Just do your part and everything will work out like I promised. He dipped his head in another bow. As you wish, Shurin. Chapter 7, Severed. He'd been too late. Zuko sat in front of the abyss, still as a statue, and let his body go numb. It was how he felt anyway. The thread was gone. Aang's door of energy was gone. Aang had jumped, Zuko had panicked and raged, and then, nothing. No bond. No Aang. Katara kept trying to say there had to be an explanation. She reminded him that Aang had been called to this place, that the spirit had said this was how he'd get his lost abilities back. She said Avatar stuff didn't always make sense at first. I don't care about Avatar stuff. Zuko shouted. I don't want to even hear that word now. But he. Just don't. Don't try to make this better. Don't tell me it's going to be okay, because all I can think is how much I kept saying he had to overcome his block. I kept saying the world needed him, that the world needed the Avatar. Grief spilled out of his shattered numbness, burning his eyes and wetting his cheeks with tears. I pushed him. We all pushed him, and for what? So he could throw himself into some death hole. I don't think he. I don't care. His chest hurt so much, as if a wall was crushing his lungs. This is wrong. It's all wrong, and now I can't feel him anymore. I can't. Words failed as he shuddered for breath and his throat got too constricted by the choking lump that had formed. Katara wrapped her arms around him. She held him so tight that it hurt his ribs, but he didn't mind. He clutched her back just as desperately. He's alive, she whispered. Zuko shook his head, not really disagreeing but unable to agree either. Everything in him ached with loss. She pulled back and took his face in her hands, meeting his eyes. Her own were just as bright with tears. He's alive, okay? I know it. Then why did the bond vanish? His voice broke. He's always been there within me. I keep trying and trying to connect with him, but I can't. I can't. Her thumbs brushed away his tears. I don't know why the bond is gone, but I do know Aang is still out there. He has to be. How? How can you be so certain? She took his hand and placed it on her chest. Because I feel it here. The steady beat of her heart thrummed against his palm. He swallowed and met her gaze. He's not gone, she said. He's going to come back to us. Trust me. Trust him. Zuko's breath caught in his throat. She was amazing. He had never met anyone so full of faith and optimism. The sheer conviction in her eyes made all his fears seem so insubstantial. It made hope bloom again in a tiny bud. Without a word, he pulled her tightly into his arms. Her hands stroked his back, light and soothing. He sighed into her hair and closed his eyes. What did I ever do to deserve you? He breathed, so soft it was the merest exhalation of words. HRM? Did you say something? He held her even closer, taking comfort in her warmth and scent. It's nothing. I'm sorry I yelled at you, and I'm glad you came. I'm glad you're here. Me too. A beat. You'd be totally lost without me. She meant it as harmless teasing, just an attempt to lighten the mood, but his whole body resonated with the truth of that statement. He really would be lost without her. He pulled back and looked into her eyes. They were such a beautiful color, like flecks of ocean and sky interwoven. Before he'd met her, he'd never known blue could be so warm. He'd never known he could come to love the color so much. His hand glided up to her cheek while the other remained loosely on her waist. Katara, he whispered. What? Thank you. Truly. He pressed his forehead to hers, eyes sliding shut again. Their breath intermingled for a few heartbeats before he pulled back and got to his feet. She glanced up at his extended hand. Come on, he said, we can't stay here. What about Aang? Shouldn't we wait for him? He'll come back to us when he's ready. We just have to trust him, right? The corner of her mouth curved a fraction. You're right. Oh. Zuko set out for the prisons later that night. Azula, for all that she would have liked to join him, had conceded that stealth was more his forte than hers. It didn't help that she only had one functioning arm. As such, she settled for telling him not to screw up and then sat on her preferred cushion to wait. Katara sat on the opposite cushion and kept giving her sidelong glances. What? Angela snapped after several minutes of this. Nothing. Silence continued. So did the glances. She narrowed her eyes. Spit it out if there's something you wish to say. Katara shifted on her cushion, one hand fidgeting with a loose lock of hair. I just... What? No, it's nothing. Forget it. Angela raised her eyebrows. Miss Bleeding Heart's cheeks had gone a bit pink, which meant whatever she wanted to say made her embarrassed. Is this about my brother? I said forget it. Ah, the blush had darkened. Right on target then. We're probably going to be here for a while, Angela observed. I can't say I'm fond of your company, but talking would be more interesting than sitting here in silence. Well, for the most part. Do you ever say anything that isn't an insult? Oh, don't act so self-righteous. You know you don't like me either. Katara did not argue this point. Instead, she sighed and traced a random pattern with her finger on the low table. Her mouth twisted as she struggled to get words out. Is it true that in the Fire Nation you... The silence dragged. Angela's eyebrows rose even higher. It hardly needs to be said, but I can't answer your question if you don't tell me it. Well, you're not making this any easier when you keep looking at me all judgy. You flail. I judge. Just spit it out. Katara sighed loudly again and pressed her face to her hands, perhaps in a poor attempt to hide the blush spreading all over her cheeks. All right, all right. I heard this morning that... There was a knock at the door. The two girls exchanged a glance of mutual wariness. Without a word, Katara got to her feet and headed for the door. Angela followed her, cradling flames behind her back just in case their visitor intended trouble. Who is it? Katara asked. It's us. Us sounded like Yuzo and Itsuo. Katara opened the door. Angela snuffed her flames in her fist as she realized it really was just the two boys. Rather than greet them, she headed back to her cushion and left Katara to do the social niceties. That didn't stop Itsuo from giving her a silent hello once he was inside. He was always friendly with her, had been ever since he'd healed her while they'd both been Shuren's prisoners. It had used to bother her a little, but not so much these days. Yuzo and Itsuo stayed for a while to talk. Katara told them about what happened with Ain, which had both boys calling him crazy and making many concerned opinions. Still, Miss Bleeding Heart also seemed to be Miss Hopeful Speeches, because she was quick to come to Ain's defense and claimed it would all work out. It had better, Yuzo said frankly. Coming here would have been a waste of time otherwise. The sooner we leave, the better. Can't wait to get away from this toxic place and that woman. Itsuo frowned and his shoulders slumped a little. That woman was probably his mother. Katara placed her hand on his arm. She's still not talking to you. He shook his head. I'm sorry. He just shrugged as if to say it couldn't be helped. What's her problem anyway? Katara asked. Why is she so, her? Itsuo signed how his mother had always been pretty strict, but that had only got worse when she'd been made head warrior. It was like she felt he had to be perfect, no broken rules, no mistakes, no exceptions. Plus, she'd hated the fact he hadn't wanted to follow in her footsteps. Fighting and training to become a warrior had never interested him. He'd just liked being a healer. What about your dad? He shrugged and admitted he had no idea who his dad was. The relationship clearly hadn't lasted, or maybe the guy was dead, or maybe he just didn't want anything to do with them. Either way, his mother was the only family he had now. Still seems harsh, Katara said with a frown. I just can't believe she's treating you this way. I mean, she's your mom. Not all parents love unconditionally, Angela muttered. It was something she and Zuko had both learned very quickly about their father. Mistakes were punished, kindness was almost non-existent, and respect was only offered if one was seen of worth. She'd used to take pleasure in knowing she was the only one who could get their father's approval, but now she tried not to think of him at all. Just the thought of returning to the Fire Nation made it feel like there was a ball of dread lodged in her chest. Father would be much harsher than Cho if Angela ever met him again. Itsuo met her eyes with open sympathy. It was like he'd read her inside and out, like he'd pieced together her thoughts in one blow. Angela didn't much like that. She stood up and declared she'd had enough of their company for one night. Exposing her vulnerability in front of Zuko was one thing, but she had no desire to do it in front of these people. Oh. It wasn't hard to get to the prisons. Zuko was good at stealth and he had done his research. No, the hard part was accepting that he couldn't free his mum and Shizue on the spot. There were no visible injuries on either of them, but he didn't like the stiff way Shizue moved. His mum was even worse. She'd been resting on the floor when he'd first turned up, had taken way too long to sit, and now seemed frilier than ever. What have they done? He demanded as he crouched in front of her cell, hands curled tight around the metal bars. Did they hurt you? It's nothing, Ursa said, but it was obvious she was trying too hard to be dismissive. Shizue. He looked to the neighboring cell, urging her to tell him the truth. 40 lashes to the back. His stomach clenched. I could heal. No, Ursa cut in. They'll be bound to notice and then they'd know you'd been here. He lowered his gaze, gritting his teeth. She placed her hands over his. Her touch was a shock of ice. Listen, I'm glad to see you, but you shouldn't have come. It's too dangerous. It's fine. I still have some time before the patrol comes back. No one will know I was here. And what if they come back earlier? What if something happens to mess up your plan? Her lips curved into a sad smile. You're too reckless, my love. You always were. He frowned and covered her hands with his. You're cold. They don't let us have fires, Shizue said in a flat tone. All part of the punishment. His grip tightened on his mum's hands. She was so thin. Being stuck this deep in the caves with no heat couldn't be good for her, especially since it was winter. Are they doing anything to take care of you? Don't worry about me. What matters is you and your sister are safe. He swallowed against the sudden lump in his throat. Is that why you did it? Is that why you lied? If the sages had learned the truth, the punishment would have been far worse. They would not have forgiven Shizue and me for keeping you from them for so long. They would have wanted to make you theirs, no matter what it took. As for Angela, she would be considered too much of a threat. I couldn't risk it. The explanation did nothing to ease the heaviness in his chest, nor did the dark circles under her eyes or her subtle shivers. I hate this, he whispered. I hate seeing you like this. She reached through the bars and stroked his face. That's why you shouldn't have come. It only hurts us both. He closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, not caring that her skin felt like ice. Go now, she said, pulling back from him. We'll be okay. We'll survive. Just make sure Aang. Oh. You don't know. He quickly told her what had happened. Shizue's brow furrowed. It can't be good that the bond was severed. The Avatar is not a fire healer, and a life bond like yours is only cut when one or both die. That worried me too, he admitted, but Katara is certain he's alive. I want to believe her. I want to believe in him. I do not think we need to fear, Ursa murmured. There is a power at work here that we cannot see, but he was guided by it. We must trust that this is all a step towards him realizing his destiny. Shizue did not look impressed. I find it hard to believe the world will be saved by a child who likes to play with marbles. Zuko almost smiled. He showed you that trick. He showed everyone. We were on that ship for a long time. His lips did twitch into a smile then. Trust Aang to go around showing people his dumb bending tricks. Ursa touched his hands again, drawing his attention. She once more encouraged him to leave before he was caught. She didn't think the risk was worth it. It was best to keep their heads down until Aang sorted out his side of things. I don't want to leave you. You must. Her thumb stroked the back of his hand. I have been through worse than this. Trust me, Shizue and I will be fine. He closed his eyes briefly. Fine. I'll go for now, but at least let me help you with this. He clasped her hands, allowing heat to emanate from his palms to warm her. It wasn't enough, of course. Not for Shizue when he did the same for her either. That was the worst part about all of this. It hurt to see them cold and in pain. It hurt to know there was nothing more he could do, not unless he wanted to bring more trouble upon them. "I'll come again tomorrow night," he whispered. "You'd better not," Ursa responded. He gave her a look that made it clear she couldn't change his mind. "Stubborn boy." She stroked his cheek again. "Do me this favor. Keep yourself safe." "I'm good at this, Mum. You really don't have to worry." She laughed in a bit of exasperation. "Your uncle is right. You're going to turn all my hair gray with your stubborn recklessness, and even then I'm sure you'll be saying, 'It's okay, Mum. You don't need to worry.'" Uncle said that. That was kind of offensive. Zuko had been trying really hard to curb his impulses and think things through before taking action. It wasn't his fault bad things kept happening. Sometimes risks had to be taken. Sometimes he was the only one who could take action. His thoughts must have showed on his expression, for she smiled and ruffled his hair. It was something she'd done when he was a child, and it brought a small blush to his cheeks now. He was almost 17, his hair was not for ruffling, even if he did kind of like it. There was affection in every careless touch. He had missed that. "Your uncle loves you, as do I." Her voice took on the mum tone. "And that's why you'll turn me gray if you insist on being stubborn and make me worry so much. I don't want to do that to you." He touched her dark hair and met her eyes. "But I'm worried about you too, and Angela is as well, so you have to let me check up on you for both of us, okay?" Something shifted in her expression. "Angela said she was worried about me." Not in those words, but close enough. "You know her." "I see." He bit his lip. "Actually, I think you were right about me needing to be patient with her. She hasn't been so hostile these days, and I think she's beginning to see that father was wrong. I think she's trying to change." She smiled softly. "I'm glad. I had hoped that being away from his influence would help her." His frown deepened. "About that, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." "What?" "Why did you marry him? Why did you even leave this place?" She pulled back from the bars as if retreating into a shell. "Undying would say it was my destiny." "Your destiny?" "The tribe needed a spy in the palace. Someone close to the Fire Lord. Someone who could move freely and not be viewed as a threat. I was chosen because my father was Avatar Roku's son and it was known that Fire Lord Ajalan was looking for a wife for Prince Oze. It didn't matter that my father married a fire healer and moved to this place. It didn't matter that my grandfather was viewed as an enemy to the Fire Nation. My blood was still considered noble, second only to that of the royal family. All I had to do was pretend I believed in Sozin's vision. That was really all it took. Failure was not an option. I did what was necessary to ensure your father would not wish to marry any other woman." A frown tugged at his lips. He'd grown up in the palace long enough to know that was code for things best left unexplained. "Why are you worrying about this, my love? It happened a long time ago, and regardless of what I feel for your father, I do not regret giving birth to you or your sister. If given the choice, I would do it all again if that meant I got to keep you as my children. How can you feel that way after all you must have gone through?" She leaned forward to cup his cheek through the bars. "Because I love you. I love you both." A final stroke of her thumb. "Now go before the guards return." Zuko didn't argue this time. He left his mum and Shizue with promises that he would come back the next night. Maybe if they were really lucky, Aang would have returned by then so a jailbreak could happen. He definitely didn't want to dwell on what it would mean if they were all wrong about trusting Aang's judgment. He has to come back. He has to. The words were an echo in his heart. It wasn't because Aang was the Avatar or they could actually do with his help. Zuko just wanted his friend back. He couldn't imagine a world without Aang's bright smiles and cheerful chatter. He didn't want to imagine that world. Oh. Ding. Ding. The chime was gentle yet piercing. Aang opened his eyes with a clawing gasp. He was flat on his back, his whole body aching, lungs screaming for breath. It felt like someone had punched a hole through his ribs and snatched something precious from him. Tears prickled as he struggled to comprehend the phantom wound of loss. Physical pain he could handle, but this. This hurt like a blade to the soul. Gingerly, he sat up and looked around. He was sitting in water, though it was shallow enough to only submerge his hands. Mist cloaked everything else. His heart quickened and he pushed himself to his feet, staggering and creating little splashes. "Hello?" he called. "Anyone here?" No answer. Panic squeezed his chest. This was too much like that misty place of nothing he'd been trapped in during his coma. "Hello? Guardian spirit? Roku." He tried to run, but his legs trembled like jelly and he collapsed onto his hands and knees. Water dripped from his face. He wasn't sure if it was from the splashes or tears. For a moment he just stared at his frightened reflection, watching it ripple and distort. "Avatar Aang." The voice seemed to come from everywhere, though it was not the same that had spoken to him before. This one was smooth and feminine. He scrambled to his feet. "Hello? Who's there?" "This way." Aang was about to ask where this way was meant to be, but then he caught sight of a stone pedestal in the distance, cradled by a circle of light. He approached it as swiftly as his wobbly legs would allow. On top of the white stone lay 4 items, a clay turtle, a pull-string propeller, a wooden hog monkey, and a wooden hand drum. His heart got lodged in his throat. These were the Avatar relics. These were the 4 toys he had chosen out of thousands, which had convinced the monks he was the reincarnated Avatar. What's going on?" he asked. "This is where it all began for you." The mist parted in a rush. Colors and shapes formed, showing him the southern air temple where he had grown up. Aang's heart ached as he saw his old friends and mentors. They were so real, seemed so close, as if he could just reach out his hand and touch them. Before he could test this theory, the scene changed to those days of increased isolation and study. The other kids had stopped playing with him, the older monks had turned stricter and stricter. Gyatso was the only one who seemed to care about his feelings. "Why are you showing me this?" He didn't want to relive these memories, because of course he knew what happened next. The monks had tried to separate him from Gyatso and he had chosen to run away. He had fled from his responsibilities and ended up trapped in an iceberg for 100 years. Perhaps you should ask yourself. Why did you run? I was scared. I didn't want to lose Gyatso. You were scared of losing your friend, yes, but that is not the real reason. He stared at his feet, insides squirming. I didn't want to be the Avatar. I just wanted to be a normal kid. From the moment you took your first breath, you were not like the other children. I know. Aang closed his eyes. I know I can't run from my duties anymore. The world needs me. Knowing is not enough. What? If you truly wish to reclaim what you have lost, you must prove yourself worthy. You must prove you are ready to take up the mantle of being the Avatar. I thought I did that when I jumped into the abyss. That was only the first trial, and one you may still yet fail. But I jumped. I'm here. To be reborn, one must first taste death. One must be willing to lose everything. Are you ready to lose everything, Avatar Aang? Or will you turn back to protect the bond you cherish? His eyes widened and he clutched his chest. Zuko. That's what happened. Our bond is gone. For now, yes. And if you keep going forward, it will be severed permanently. Why? He glanced around at the mist, seeking any trace of the voice's owner. Why does it have to be cut? Zuko has helped me so much. He's saved my life and everything. Indeed, he has done much for you. Yet how can you be born anew when your spirit is anchored to him? How can you be an Avatar when you are too scared to walk on your own? I am not too scared. I'm just. Then let him go. Aang swallowed. There's no other way. There is not. Everything in him seemed to plummet as if the weight of mountains was pressing down on him. He didn't want to give up his bond. He cherished the closeness he shared with Zuko, cherished the comfort it gave him to know they were always connected. Just experiencing this temporary separation was bad enough. He didn't want to be stuck with all the loss and crushing aloneness that had been carved into his soul. But then maybe that was the problem. Maybe the voice was right. Zuko had become like his Gyatso, and right now he had to choose which bond was more important, the one he shared with his friend or the one he was supposed to share with his past lives. Aang let out a breath. Okay. I'll do it. I'll let go of the bond. Saying the words ripped new holes of grief and loss into his soul, but he had already come this far. Plus, he still remembered what Zuko had told him at the Eastern Air Temple, back when he'd struggled to unlock the final chakra because of his attachment to Katara. You're not going to lose her, Aang. But if you keep trying to make her your anchor, a part of you will always be controlled by your attachment to her. Look at what's happening right now. You have the chance to master the Avatar state, but instead you're holding yourself back because you're scared that you'll find yourself alone again. You're just running away. Blunt as those words had been, they were true. Katara was still at Aang's side, albeit not in the way he had hoped. Aang had to be brave again now. Losing the bond did not mean he would lose Zuko. This was just another part of moving forward. He had to learn to walk on his own. Jaw clenched tight, he marched into the mist and left the pedestal and the images of the Southern Air Temple behind. He did not look back. Chapter 8, Change. The water had turned black and as cold as ice, striking him with a knife's sharpness. Aang's throat bobbed as the dark liquid crept up his legs, up his waist, getting deeper with every step. Soon, he was tilting his head back so it wouldn't get in his mouth. You don't really expect me to go under, right? He called to the voice that had been guiding him. Now he was no expert on water, but he was pretty sure you weren't meant to swim in stuff that was black as pitch. Not to mention he couldn't bend. He guessed he'd passed into the spirit world when he jumped into the abyss, which was fine since he'd been hoping to make it here, but that also meant no water bending. Hey! He called a bit louder. You there? No answer. His heart thumped faster. For all that he'd determined he had to learn to walk on his own, just like the spirit had advised, that didn't make it any easier. Or maybe it was because a part of him instinctively knew that once he went under the water, there would be no going back. To be reborn, one must first taste death. One must be willing to lose everything. Are you ready to lose everything, Avatar Aang? He closed his eyes, his entire body pounding with the pulsing flow of his blood. It was thunder in his ears, in his chest. It pulsed and pulsed with life, with a need to preserve that life. But he had come this far. He had come this far and he had to trust that this was all part of the plan. He had to trust that the voice had guided him here for a reason. I can do this, he whispered. He took another step forward, then another step. The water swallowed him in black. It was like sinking into endless night, no moon, no stars, no light, or life at all. Panic seized his chest but he did not resist. He embraced the darkness, the cold, the soul-piercing shivers. He let the water pull him down, down, down. Are you afraid, young Avatar? The voice came from all around him, louder than before. Yes, he thought in answer. He could not speak unless he wanted to get a mouthful of water. Yes. I'm afraid. Yet you still surrender yourself to me. I have to. Why? This is what you told me to do. Is that all? What? All you have shown me is that you can follow orders. I wonder, is it bravery to walk into death's embrace because you are told to, or is it just stupidity? Hey. That's not fair. It's not like I didn't think about what I was doing. Then why did you come? Because. He reflected on all his thoughts and feelings, why he had jumped into the abyss, why he had agreed to sever his bond with Zuko, why he had let the water take him. Fear had made him hesitate at every point, had whispered for him to turn back, but he had kept going. He had known. Because this is the only way. Because I've already failed the world once and I refuse to do it again. Because I'm the Avatar and I have to make myself whole again, even if that means facing death itself. Light glimmered from the depths. Two eyes like massive rubies. Humans often mistake water as being the element of life, but water is and has always been the element of change. Change does not come without sacrifice. It is the chill of winter that paves the way for spring, it is the death of all that is weak and unnecessary. I understand. Then prove your conviction. Let your anchors in your old self die so you may be reborn and the Avatar this world needs can live again. Aang closed his eyes. In his mind, he could see the boy who had run from his responsibilities. The boy who had never wanted to be the Avatar. Even after unlocking the 7 chakras and accepting his destiny, he had been so quick to fall into old habits. Now he understood why he had failed. Knowing he was the Avatar wasn't enough. Accepting that he had to bring balance wasn't enough. He had to act. He had to change. Aang opened his mouth and let the black water rush in, let it slip its way down his throat and fill him completely. It wasn't choking. It wasn't even that unpleasant. This was nothing like drowning. Instead, he felt like he was being returned to the womb, back to the dark depths where all life took seed. Ruby eyes glinted brighter and he caught a glimpse of a shadowed form, almost like a turtle with the head of a snake. Then his heart slowed, his thoughts unraveled, and all he could think and breathe was water. Oh oh oh. Ding. Ding. It was the strange chime again. Aang opened his eyes to blurry bunches of pink and white. He blinked. The bunches were still there, but now his vision was beginning to settle and he could see that they were blossoms. One of the petals came loose and landed on his cheek, soft as snow. He sat up. The water was gone. Instead, his hands and legs brushed against green shoots and dirt. Trees brimming with blossoms encircled him like a giant crown, and every breath filled him with the scent of freshness and new life. Okay, he murmured. I think I just stumbled from winter into spring. That is correct. He jumped and cried out as the green thing appeared out of nowhere. It kind of looked like it had the head of a lizard, aside from the antlers, but at the same time it was such a weird combination of animals that he didn't know what to call it. It walked on 2 legs, which were furry and hoofed like a goat's. It had tiny arms and little clawed hands, and it had a long tail like a lion. It also wasn't much bigger than his hand. Who are you? What are you would probably be too rude of a question to ask. I'm the green dragon, it responded in a rapid-fire voice. Aang blinked. He'd seen pictures of dragons. This was definitely not a dragon. Okay. The lizard thing pointed a claw at him. You embraced the waters of change and have been reborn, however, as of now you are like a seed that needs to take proper root, a koalam that must learn to walk, a rubber that hasn't learned to hop. No. The green dragon threw its little hands up dramatically. Why would you be a rubberoo? Because they're kind of spring-like. Don't be ridiculous. A forked tongue flicked out in what Aang thought was an unnecessarily rude gesture. Rubberoo. Don't make me laugh. Aang repressed a sigh. Spirits were always mean to him. In any case, you are still a work in progress. That's why you're here. You dig? Aang scratched the side of his head. And what am I supposed to be? Progressing. The green dragon slapped its forehead with its tail. Aang guessed a face tail was the only thing it could do since its tiny hands could barely reach its chin. Change is a process, sonny. You don't just get to forge yourself anew and that's it. You gotta work at that change. You gotta stay true to your conviction, and that means putting in some nice roots so you can stay grounded. Great. He tried not to let his shoulders slump. Giving up already? No. No, of course not. It's just. I'm an airbender. Being grounded has never come naturally to me. Excuses. Hey. He puffed his cheeks out. It's not excuses. It's true. So all the other airbenders were as flighty as you, were they? Well, no, but. Didn't think so. Well, most of them were old. A sharp claw poked him in the leg. Ow. Aang rubbed the wounded spot. You are full of excuses. Another poke. Hey, that hurts. Good. 3 more pokes. Get it in your head that your natural element doesn't control you or your choices. Besides, you're not just an airbender. You're the Avatar. But. You. Are. The. Avatar. Aang gulped. The tiny lizard thing was kind of intimidating. Okay. I get it. Then say it back to me. I'm the Avatar. Louder. I'm the Avatar. Yell it for the hills. I'm the Avatar. Good. Now pick me up. Aang blinked. Huh. The green dragon smiled, baring 2 rows of razor-sharp teeth. Pick me up, Avatar Aang. Okay. Given the size of the little spirit, it didn't seem like a difficult request. He carefully took hold of its tiny waist and pulled. And pulled. And pulled. Its smile widened. Maybe you should try 2 hands. Aang did so with no result, aside from his face going tomato red from strain. It felt like he was trying to lift a mountain. He groaned and fell back, hands throbbing slightly. This is impossible. Is it? Or are you just weak? I'm not weak. Then why can't you pick up little old me? Because little old you is somehow super heavy. There's no way I can lift you. I can't even budge you. A tisk. Disappointing. You really are the weakest avatar ever. Maybe I should call you the weak-atter. Aang scowled off to the side and folded his arms. Well, now you're just being mean. I'm stating a fact. You tricked me. You made it seem like this would be easy, but it's not. Life isn't easy. Not everything will come naturally to you, not everything will go your way, and sometimes what appears to be the simplest of tasks will be the most difficult. Aang's shoulders slumped. I do know that, but... No buts. Now if you wish to progress, you need to complete my test. You can't be serious. Oh, I am. A sharp-teethed smile. I'll be over here whenever you're ready to try again. Aang flopped against the grass with a groan. He almost missed the creepy death water. Oh. Land. Toph threw herself onto the ground and used her bending to burrow in and hug the dirt. Sweet land. Mai peered down at her. I thought you were fine on the ship after Zuko settled your seasickness. It's still not the same. Clearly. Leaving her to it, Mai joined the others and headed to the area where they were to set up their base of operations. The letters Iroh and Hakata had exchanged with their contacts suggested their allies were not too far off. No doubt in a few days, this place would be crawling with warriors and Earth Kingdom soldiers. Can't believe we're here, Ty Lee murmured, coming to stand next to her. What, in this dirt dump? She shook her head. No, I mean we're home. I didn't think when I returned that it would be like this. I know what you mean. Mai was not prone to sentimentalism. She had never thought she was attached to the Fire Nation, but being back on home soil and knowing she was preparing to fight her own people was a strange feeling. It wasn't quite dread, wasn't quite sadness, but it wasn't pleasure either. You think Azula will join us as well? Ty Lee asked. I doubt it. Even if she did, she'd just stab us in the back and turn us over to the Fire Lord. You don't know that. I think she actually... Look, we've been over this. But... You can have all the hope you want, but that doesn't change the fact she's a cruel, manipulative person. I'm not even sure she sees people as people. To her, we're all just tools to be used and discarded. Ty Lee bit her lip. I know it seems that way, but you weren't there when. I don't care. Mai averted her face so only the scarred side could be seen. I will never trust her. I will never be her friend. She walked off before Ty Lee could say anything else, her back rigid and movement stiff. Frustration prickled under her skin like an itch that couldn't be scratched. She was so tired of hearing about Azula, so tired of feeling pressured to give her a chance. Mai had given enough chances. She would give no more. Rather than stick with the others and help put up tents, she went off on her own and threw knives at a tree. She was still doing this when Sokka eventually found her. What? She said as she wrenched the knives from the trunk. Just wanted to see how you were going. I saw you head off earlier, and when you didn't come back. I'm fine. He folded his arms across his chest. Doesn't look like it with the way you're gouging holes into that tree. Maybe I don't like this tree. What did it do? Leaf at you funny. Her nose scrunched. Was that meant to be a joke? What if I say yes? I'd say you're getting worse. He tried to look dignified for all of 3 seconds before he gave up and unfolded his arms. Okay, yes. I admit that one could have been better. She rolled her eyes and threw another knife. Hey. He touched her shoulder. I'm serious, though. What's going on? His tone wasn't a demand. It was an invitation. Even the way he looked at her was a silent statement of, I'm here. I'm listening. You can tell me. She turned away, mouth a tight line. It doesn't matter. Look, I won't push you if you don't want to talk about it. I'll leave right now if that's what you want, but I'm just worried. I don't like seeing you upset. Her gaze darted to his in surprise. He smiled and pressed his finger to her forehead, just like she always did to him. Plus, that internal monologue of yours is pretty loud. Thud, thud. Her heart pounded a little louder, a little faster. She tucked her knives back into the mechanisms hidden within her sleeves and raised her eyebrow. Think you know me so well, do you? Actually, I do. Then what am I thinking now? You're annoyed about something. You tend to twirl your knives when you're bored, but you gouge holes in things when something is really bothering you. I don't think you're annoyed at me, otherwise you'd have told me to go away already. Her lips twitched. True. He frowned. You can talk to me about it, you know. You always listen to me. The least I can do is listen to you. She sighed and looked down at their feet. I'm just frustrated, I guess. About what? I don't know. Being back in the Fire Nation, listening to Ty Lee go on about how she thinks Angela has changed. I swear if I have to listen to one more, she put on a higher voice, you just have to give her a chance, I'm going to scream. Wow. You do a really good Ty Lee impression. She jabbed him in the chest. Tell anyone and I'll kill you. He laughed, holding his hands up in an appeasing gesture. Got it. Your secret is safe with me. The amusement quickly faded from his eyes. But, yeah, I can see why that'd be frustrating. Angela is kind of... His mouth twisted. Pretty much. Of course Ty Lee doesn't get it. She seems to think Angela not being completely horrible those few times is reason enough to trust her again. She thinks once the others get back that we can all be friends again. Her hands clenched and unclenched. But I'm not like Ty Lee. Angela burned my face and hasn't shown any remorse for it. Frankly, I don't care if she changes or not, I don't want anything to do with her. You have every right to feel that way. Her eyes met his. Really? You're not going to tell me this will revoke my membership from the Second Chances Club? Remember when we were in BA Sing SE and you were the one who said we needed to stay and make that truce with Angela? I thought you were so brave then. I still do. But that doesn't mean you have to forgive her now, and it definitely doesn't mean you have to be her friend. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. I won't think any less of you either way. Thud, 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 thud. The skittering beat of her heart brought warmth to her cheeks. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, giving her that look. She'd seen it enough to know what he wanted. They'd been tiptoeing around this look and all the feelings fluttering between them ever since that first time on the beach, but especially after Suki had broken up with him. Not yet, had seemed to be the mutual agreement. It wouldn't be right. But here his eyes whispered now, and her heart thrummed a thundering yes. Bet I can guess what you're thinking, she murmured. What? She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a butterfly wings kiss, light and teasing. She pulled back, checking to make sure she'd read him correctly. The faint color on his cheeks and the dopey smile on his lips told her she needn't have worried. Yeah, he said, you're definitely a mind reader. Their eyes met and they kissed again, arms wrapping around each other. Needless to say, it was a while before they returned to camp. Oh. All right there, Sonny? You haven't moved in a while. Aang scowled at the little lizard thing now reclining on a rock. I'm thinking. Oh, thinking. His shoulders inched closer to his ears. Dealing with the green dragon was like dealing with Toph during earthbending training. The tone it used made everything sound like an insult. Well, maybe if you gave me a hint, Aang grumbled, I'd. No way. No freebies for you. Besides, I did give you a hint. His eyes widened. You did. Of course, though whether you can figure it out is another matter entirely. I'm beginning to think you're not only the weak adder but also the stupid adder. Aang gave him an unimpressed look. That joke isn't getting any funnier. Sure it is. You don't know comedic genius when you hear it. It's not comedic genius. You're just being mean. Anyway, if you've already given me the hint, you can give it to me again, right? Nope. Ah, come on. Why not? Sonny, you're the Avatar. You figure it out. Aang sighed. But I don't know. I've tried so many different things and nothing works. His eyes narrowed. You aren't just messing with me, are you? I would do no such thing. He continued to peer at the Sprit in suspicion. Look, I gave you this test for a reason. Why don't you think about that? Aang frowned and rested his chin on his palms. He couldn't physically pick up the green dragon. Having accepted that, he'd tried to think outside the box and come up with a different solution, even reinterpret the words. But that didn't seem to be what it wanted. So what was the point of this test? He tapped his finger to his cheek. You said a lot of stuff about roots and being grounded. Was that the hint? A smile was all he got in response. All right then. Keep your secrets. It seemed he really would have to figure it out on his own. Still, the more he thought about it, the more he was sure it had to do with becoming grounded somehow. He just wasn't sure what that meant. Aang's brow furrowed even more. He looked around at the silky grass and blossoms. This place was meant to be like spring. Out of the four elements, the one associated with spring was earth. He'd struggled a lot with earthbending because it was all about being steady and strong like a rock. He didn't do rock very well. His nature was more to be a leaf on the wind, to drift rather than resist, to avoid rather than confront. Oh, he murmured. It was like puzzle pieces falling into place. So many of his problems had come about because he had all these duties and expectations placed on him, and he honestly didn't know how to handle that sometimes. It was hard to know the right course of action. In his heart, he was simply Aang the air nomad, so he tried his best to follow the monk's teachings. But he was also the Avatar, not to mention living 100 years from the peaceful world he had known. Where did he fit? Where did his values fit? He didn't know. Ever since he'd woken up from that iceberg, he'd felt like he was being pulled in so many directions. I think I get it now, he said softly. The green dragon approached with a much more solemn expression. Yes, I think you do. He hugged his knees to his chest. Is that why you kept reminding me I'm the Avatar? As the Avatar, it is important for you to be grounded. There are many who will oppose you or give you advice that conflicts with your purpose. How can you weather these storms if you do not know where you stand? How can you stand firm if your own heart is at war with your duty? The spirit shook its tiny head. In the end, a tree that is not rooted properly must give way and fall. Aang closed his eyes, thinking of how he'd blocked the Avatar state because he'd refused to listen to his past lives and use fire against the sea serpent. He hadn't wanted to hurt anyone, not even the sea serpent, but in the end he'd got far more people hurt, not to mention almost died, because he'd lost control again and eventually the link with his past lives. He hadn't been able to protect anyone. He'd been completely useless. What do I need to do? He whispered. That is for you to decide. The Avatar's purpose never changes, but only you can decide what kind of Avatar you will be and where you will establish your roots. I don't want to let the world down again. I want to be a good Avatar, I really do. A lump formed in his throat. But does that mean I have to sacrifice everything? Does that mean I can't be me? Not at all. But everyone seems to tell me otherwise, that it doesn't matter what the monks say, and sometimes I'm scared they're right. I'm scared that everything I know and that's important to me doesn't belong in this world anymore. Something hot prickled his eyes. Yet how can I give it up? I'm the only air nomad left. For so long, I thought I was the only airbender left. If I don't follow those teachings, who will? Who will even remember them? A clawed, tiny hand touched his leg. You want my advice, Sonny? Aang nodded. Think about what restoring peace and balance means to you. What it means to me? That's right. His brow furrowed. I guess I want everyone to stop fighting. I want the world to be more like what it was, like the one I knew. The nations weren't divided then and there was more fun and laughter. Then who better to guide the nations into finding that world again than a boy from 100 years ago? Tears slipped free of his eyelashes. You think so? We great spirits have been aware of you since your birth, young Aang, as have we followed the lives of every other avatar. I do not think it a coincidence that you survived all those years in the iceberg. This world needs you, and not just because you can wield 4 elements or use the avatar state. Your ways are not theirs. That makes you special. Aang's eyes widened. Then you don't think I have to ignore the monk's teachings to be a good avatar? So long as those teachings don't conflict with your duties, I don't see why you have to give up any of them. More tears fell, but he didn't try to check them. He'd never felt so light, so at peace, not even after he'd unlocked all the 7 chakras. Just remember, the spirit warned, while it's good to be rooted firmly in your own values, you must also know when to bend, as does the tree to coastal winds. Be open to wisdom, be open to what the other nations can teach you, but never forget where you stand. Never forget that your purpose is to bring peace and balance to this world. I understand. Good. A lizardy smile of sharp teeth. Then pick me up, Avatar Aang. Aang reached down and picked the little spirit up with one hand. A frown crept onto his lips. I'm glad I passed the test, but you actually were messing with me before, weren't you? I bet I would have never been able to do this until you allowed it. Wrong. You became stronger once you were spiritually grounded. Really? Really, and don't you forget it. Change is a continuous process, remember? Humans will always have weaknesses, always be tempted into losing their way. That's why you can't forget your roots. They'll hold you firm when you need it most. I'll do my best. The green dragon flashed another razor-sharp grin. You'd better, otherwise I'll have to call you the weak adder again. Check the description for the links to the author.